What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoners Rift Team's live pod, and patch 14.19 has hit the PBE. I don't expect to do a second rundown for this because I think this is going to cover just about everything. I've already talked about the set of item nerfs several times, but ultimately, now that they're on PBE, now that people have done their knee-jerk reactions, we've put our dev blog out about why we wanted to do this. I'm going to go through line by line all the changes currently on PBE. There might be a couple more that come in by the end of it all, but let's talk about what's going on here. There's also some other things in this patch that I can give at least some context on too. Okay, topics. We're going to talk about Tristana, who has some changes on the PBE, Cassante, who has some changes on the PBE, and a whole bunch of items Okay, I'm going to start with Tristana. So we know that Tristana is in a somewhat underpowered place right now. Now, what's interesting is we got a new report recently that's now fully operationalized, which is a really good breakdown of win rates across high levels of champion mastery. This is something that we could have pulled manually once in a while, but it wasn't operationalized where it would auto-update every day, every patch, whatever, with a bunch of easy tools for turning patches on and off, whatever. We put the request out, it got built, it now works, and as of last week, we have a really, really good framework that we can look at to say, okay, we can really reliably look at champion win rate growth with mastery without a lot of manual work from other people to get it ready, and so we're going to have basically a much better use of objective data for what champions win rates really should be. Now, there's still going to be a very large human element. Champions who are statistically definitely overpowered, like, for example, current Cassiopeia, current Akshan, current Anivia. Annie is currently technically overpowered. Is anyone complaining about Annie? I don't think so. Are we nerfing Annie? No, we're not. Again, the human element still matters. How players feel about it still matters. But one thing this is really, really good at is sussing out actual role skew of champions. Did you know the average bot lane player has played more Tristana games than the average mid lane player? No duh. But what that means is bot lane Tristana is farther along the mastery curve than mid lane Tristana is, which means Tristana bot's win rate is more inflated, or Tristana mid's win rate is more deflated than Tristana bot. If you look at win rates, Tristana is like 1% or so higher win rate in bot lane. If you use mastery adjusted data, Tristana mid is 0.5 to 1% higher win rate in mid. Tristana is innately mid skewed, but most mid laners are bad at Tristana. Now, what's kind of funny to me is, of course, Tristana has been in this state for quite a while. There haven't been any like really big kit changes, but that is the state we are in right now. And because of this data being very obvious and very clearly here now, and by the way, like, we need players to play the champ enough to have enough data to use this reliably, right? Like, there's not a lot of, like, you know, support and theory data out there to let you know how good things are, even though we pull multiple patches together. This thing has to actually exist for us to have enough data to make good judgments here. But it's really cool, really useful, a lot of fun stuff to look at. Anyway, the point is Tristana is on a base kit level currently mid-skewed across current League of Legends, right? We're measuring the last usually 4 to 5 patches at a time because it's probably good to be current in terms of what we're actually measuring, the current metagame systems and whatnot. Tristana is currently mid-skewed, and we also know that Tristana is pretty close to being pro-jailed. Now, to be fair, her actual win rates are not that abysmal when you account for champ mastery, right? Again, most mid-Trist players are bad at Trist, and so the win rate is very heavily deflated. She's much better than her winners appear, much like any new champion would. Turns out, again, not a lot of mid players play Tristana. Corki's in somewhat a similar boat. As of 0.17, Corki was like 1 to 2% underpowered because the average Corki player is mastery 4. The current median League of Legends champion is mastery 7. Corki's been around since 2009, and the current average mastery expressed by Corki is mastery 4. He is win rate deflated. So is Tristana in mid as a very example. But these are all things that, like, I will always work to educate everybody on. But also, it is useful for us to know if things are actually strong or actually weak, because it's very easy to be like, this champ's still 45. Are they bad? It's like, nah, people are bad. Sometimes. Sometimes not. Okay, so Tristana is natively mid-skewed. And what's funny is Tristana has actually very, very few levers on her kit, because she has exactly one overt AD ratio and one covert AD ratio, which is her Q attack speed. It functionally multiplies her total AD, right? E's attack damage ratio is already absolutely ridiculous. Asterisk. It's ridiculous for a single spell. None of her other spells scale with gold. So Tristana can right-click you and blow you up with E, and then nothing else happens. Nothing else scales with gold. It instead scales with ability ranks, which scales with leveling up, which scales with being in mid lane. Powerful stuff, right? And so what I basically tried to do with the change list here, I ended up writing and implementing the Tristana change list here, is I said, okay, where are all the places I can bring down Tristana's level growth to make her less good in the mid lane? Where are all the places I can give her gold scaling instead, because funneling gold tends to be a bit more of a bot lane thing on average. This tends to be true. And where are the other places that I can, maybe lightly early game skew her, because again, right, she still actually needs direct power. She is currently underpowered, even in mid for the average solo queue player, even accounting for mastery. It's the pro meta game that is very AD carry centric, but like, these champions aren't actually good in solo queue, even in high elo. Like, we have the data, it's not. Like, even the high mastery Corkis aren't actually winning a bunch of games in solo queue, unless you're like literally Chovy, but also he's the best player in the world, so like, who beats him in solo queue anyway? Whatever, it's a different point. I want to move past this. I'm spending a lot of time here. Overall tactics, right? Lower the value of XP, increase the value of gold. Okay. Third thing, sorry, as I got off topic for a second there. Third thing is look for really obvious or really good like QOL or really obvious role skewed bits of power. So Tristana's E passive, I actually forgot to write it here, but this is actually probably the biggest single change list is Tristana's E passive has been nerfed really meaningfully. So Tristana's E passive on live is 55 damage, I think, at level 1. It's 55 damage at level 1, and it goes up to like 155 damage at rank 5, which means Tristana cannot help but super turbo push minion waves. In bot lane, that is a bad thing, because the lane is long, and flash Nautilus hooks are a thing, and her turret is very, very far away. And so turbo pushing gets you killed. In mid lane, it is a good thing, because your opposing champion is under tower, and it costs you 0 mana. Your opposing champion also last hit minions in her turret with 57 base attack damage in a Doran's ring. And the lane is short, and there's no Nautilus to flash on you. You just see the Sejuani and run away, and then try to rocket jump at the right time, and you're fine. It turns out that all these AD carries with dashes, with the brush push really far back, are basically immune to jungle intervention, and the more I think about it, the more I really believe there are lots of game systems contributing to the feeling of AD carries in mid seeming to be quite oppressive. And that we probably need to take a really good look at things like mana costs of wave clear, and just make AD carries care about mana more. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here that, like, there's a lot of projects that could be done, but the type of champion that Tristana is currently expresses more strengths in mid than in bot. And the funny thing is, all this together is like a 0.5 to 1% mid skew champion. Like, it's not that extreme, but it's clearly there. At pretty much any like level of mastery you measure, Tristana mid is doing better than Tristana bot. Okay, so the E passive not only is getting nerfed to like 45 to 95 or 45 to 105 or something like that is the number, or like 40 to 100, it's something around there. But the other thing is that this specifically helps Tristana bot a lot. Tristana bot does not always get pushed. Sometimes the enemy team has push. At the current E tuning, she can last hit 2 melee minions by herself. On live, she can last hit 1 melee minion, and then she's screwed. The damage from the first explosion does enough damage that it walks over the breakpoint of 2 turret shots. And so unless she gets help from her support or does some wacky stuff with explosive charge, Tristana can only ever last hit 1 melee minion on the wave. And for caster minions, you can only ever last hit 2. That by the time you've killed 2 caster minions, even at rank 1E, the third caster minion now dies to a single turret shot. At the new tuning, she can last hit 2 melees and all 3 casters without help, which means her support only needs to last hit 1 melee minion for her, and she can get the entire wave under turret. I have played enough Tristana to know how much I hate how much Tristana E breaks my ability to last hit, and that is fixed. You still have to, of course, attack your first cast minion twice. They have like 97-ish health leftovers. You have to hit them twice. Or like have your support auto them once to get you there, but otherwise you're chilling. You might choose to not rank E at level 4 and wait a little bit because you're going to get into a breakpoint where you're doing like 60 damage per explosion instead, and that's going to make you really sad against casters for a little while, so be careful. But your melees, I think your melees would also get kind of screwed, so you might have to wait on that one. But at least rank 1 of E, you are chilling for the first basically 6 waves. Just, chill on, ranking E a second time. And there is a world where we delete that passive entirely. That might be worth doing. I didn't want to. It felt like a decent amount of flavor on the champion, and it seemed like it was okay, but I'm not against getting rid of it. I just don't know if it's mandatory at this point in time. So the E-Pass was a big thing. But again, the second biggest thing, probably the most exciting one, though, is 25 base range. She is now normal AD carry levels of range. In general, I think bot lane is a more threatening lane than mid lane. Obviously, there are some matchups in mid where she can use that 25 range even better. Yasuo and Yone are now hit from farther away with less chance for recompense or anything. But like, Ori QW still outranges her, and it's not close. Cassiopeia Q still outranges her, and it's not very close. But like, fighting back for CS when you care about whether Janna harasses you or not, or getting hit back by the Raven auto or the Ezreal Q or whatever. Okay, Ezreal Q has a really big range advantage, but like, that 25 range, I think, matters a lot more in things like bot lane. And so I expect that to be bot lane skewed. And of course, strictly powerful. Again, free bonus AS here. One other change I didn't write down is her base attack speed ratio. Not her level 1 AS, but the attack speed ratio. Her scaling with gold is being increased by about 2.5%. It's not a big deal, but it does mean every dagger and every level up is 2.5% better than it was before. It's not a ton, but it is something, right? Rapid fire is 2.5% stronger, period. It's not, again, a huge deal, but it is there. When you consider this is about, rapid fire is 10% stronger. It's like, well, this and everything else is 2.5% stronger. It is something, it is some win rate, it is some power. The W slow has been flattened to 2 seconds at all ranks instead of having a level up scaler on the slow potency. And the damage per rank up has gone from 50 per rank to 35 per rank. So a pretty big drop, not only in slow duration, but in damage per rank on W. And like level 14 is like very realistic to land for Tristana mid, so it's not that hard to reach. But there's now a 0.5 bonus AD ratio here. For the longest time, Tristana's best builds have actually been stack all the AD crit items. Like, there was a long time where her best build was IE Essence Reaver, and no one did it, and it frustrated me to no end. But like, turns out getting rapid fire back is a really big deal, but no one ever did this build. This build was good. It's still true, by the way. Tristana should just stack AD crit and rely on rapid fire for attack speed. Just do it. It's better. Just learn to deal with having low base attack speed. Turns out, ER gives you a lot of casts. And you're going to be okay, but whatever. Regardless, again, bonus AD gets a bit better here. E gets a much stronger crit mod. Of course, the maximum AD ratio and maximum base damage goes down a little bit as recompense. And in the early game, right, it's minus 10 damage, but plus AD ratio. So at varying amounts of AD, the E is strictly better. And at varying amounts of crit, the E gets actually better. Ultimately, this is still a buff in many cases. I tried to do the math to like make sense here, but it's worth noting that, again, there is much better gold scaling on the ability relative to before, even though there's a base damage nerf and a theoretical rank 5 AD ratio nerf. But keep in mind, like a level like 7-6 Tristana has a higher AD ratio and a lower base damage, and the level 7 bot lane Tristana is farther along in her build than the level 7 mid lane Tristana, right? So like this set of the nerf disproportionately nerfs mid Tristana compared to bot, even though it may still be somewhere right down. And then for this, we're changing from 100 damage per rank, 50 damage per rank. Yes, this means R has a really bad rank up on it, but keep in mind that also has a knockback rank up. Also flattened the cooldown to be the same at ranks 1 and 2 as it is on 3, so it's 100 flat here. It's still fairly long for an ADC ulti, but now 1 less level up incentive here, so it's a little bit more early game power. And the final thing here is there is now a direct stun added to the spell itself. This stun is roughly equal to the duration of the knockback itself, because it turns out when you knock someone back into a wall, and that knockback ends early because the wall is very thick and they're already done moving back, they get to move. That's been my experience playing a lot of Tristana bot lane, is that R'ing someone into a wall does kind of nothing. Now, I wouldn't mind actually adding even more stun to this and making like the R stun like 0.8 seconds at all ranks, something. So it's like, nah, I rocket jump, I buster shot you back, you are like actually stunned. There's plenty of time for the Leona to combo now or whatever. But this basically says that, hey, if you're fighting in a lane with walls next to it, which is bot lane, by the way, you're guaranteed the full stun duration even if you knock them into a wall. So that's kind of the point of that change here. So there are two QL things that are from my years of playing Tristana across time, as well as some stuff that just like I hope directionally skews bot lane more than mid. And look, this is a fairly big change list. It's going live in a patch with 100 lines of item changes into it. There's going to be a lot of chaos in this patch no matter what, which is why this is the patch to do it, because even if we get it wrong, something is invariably going to be more wrong. Even though we absolutely cannot know the full magnitude of these changes, as long as each change we believe is directionally better for bot versus mid, we can hopefully rescue Trist from pro jail. Now again, to be clear, I think there is work that we need to do to unwind the systems that have put us in this ADC mid meta. It is not optimal. It feels bad for all the established mid players, and it feels bad for all the bot laners whose champs are getting pro jailed. All of these suck for everyone involved. I know Chovy has said he loves this meta. I'm sorry, Chovy, but it's coming at the expense of... And the funny thing is, these AD carries in mid is like really only an elite MMR thing. Like, again, they're not even winning an elite MMR, but like they're also just not that prevalent elsewhere either. Like, it's the kind of thing where, again, we should still fix it, but the severity of this is like, oh, you're watching your favorite challenger streamer, not you're playing League of Legends and playing against these champions. With the exception that, like, Corki has 5 times the popularity he did 8 months ago, even at current tuning. Now, again, we should still fix Corki being so pro-jailed. Absolutely. But anyway, let's move forward. Let's move on. Let's get some stuff done. Alrighty, we have a large set of changes to K'Sante. Now, this is actually coming from a designer who I believe he's a very smart guy. I think most recently spent some time on Swarm. This guy is really smart, really awesome. I like talking with him. And so he is trying to do a K'Sante update. I have not been keeping tabs on it daily by any means, but ultimately, since it comes through into the live game, this shipping to live is under my purview in terms of, like, I'm part of the sign-off for this. And so basically it's like, all right, well, you're really smart and much better than me as a game designer. And your goals make sense. Your tactics make sense to hit goals. And this is being done in order to try to create more counterplay and fairness in the playing against case for high elo players. And K'Sante has been in our high elo, like, gameplay analysis playtests, fine-tuning, getting it there, figuring out which things work, which things don't. And if they're happy with it, everything else makes sense to me, then I'm happy with it. And so, I don't have an intimate familiarity with why every single line is here, because that is not the level of involvement I've had in this project. But I do know that, broadly speaking, very broadly, the goals are to make K'Sante fairer to fight against and have more room for counterplay. So I mentioned the Tristana section, the fact that we have much more accurate mastery win rate data. K'Sante is not underpowered. If you have proper mastery on K'Sante, he has the same win rates as champions like Yasuo and Yone and Katarina. But Katarina's average mastery level, like the median mastery level of a Katarina on live, is 13. That is first place by a lot. Second place is Yasuo at 11. The average champion is 7. K'Sante isn't even there. K'Sante is substantially underrepresented on mastery. To be fair, he's still a fairly new champion. And this is the weird thing, right? There's a couple of thoughts here. So, one, it takes a very, very long time to have a Yasuo or Katarina level of mastery on a champion. Literally a decade in some cases, right? To have, like, your average player base have such a level of mastery that they are seeing 50% win rates on aggregate on Yasuo and Katarina, two champions with infinite mastery curves. Do not think for a second we had ever launched those champions at that tuning state. Nope. They've always been stronger than that, right? And then finally Katarina's, like, matured to the point where, you know, she's, like, way up there and Yasuo's way up there and whatever. Cool. I don't think we have ever shipped, and I don't think we ever actually will ship a champion at long-term Katarina balanced. Because, again, you will have literally 9 years of this champion looks like ass. So I just don't think that'll actually happen. Even if people will say and will believe that we want to ship champions as balanced, I think the actual result of that, if everyone knew, like, what this takes, I don't think that would be true. So like, for example, Smolder as of 2 days ago is actually 2% overpowered as a bot laner. Does Smolder to you feel like a 2% overpowered bot laner? Not mid. Does Smolder feel like a 2% overpowered bot laner? His win rate, by the way, was like 49% 3 days ago or something. For most players in League of Legends. Now, maybe you're like, yeah, that actually makes sense. I think he's 2% overpowered. Okay, fine. But like, I'll bet you most players don't think that Smolder is like the second strongest AD carry in League of Legends, or I think he's second strongest. I forget who's first place. But like, would you really say that? Because like, based on pro data, they're playing in mid, but like, they're not scrambling to play in bot lane. But like, turns out Smolder has a really substantial mastery curve still to go, and the average Smolder player is like Mastery 4 because he's new. But like, I don't know, like, maybe you actually do feel all that like Smolder's 2% overpowered, but like, that's just a thing on mastery curves. Not even items yet, and I'm 20 minutes in. Oh boy. All right. So anyway, K'Sante is actually technically balanced. However, K'Sante has a fairly severe lack of counterplay problem. So I made this video a month or so ago about mastery and agency both mattering, because agency says that my opponents can't outplay me, so as long as I do my thing, I can't lose. And that is often not expressed in win rate, despite it feeling like power and actually being power, because people are human and will screw up. K'Sante has basically all the agency in almost all interactions. And again, he's currently balanced and infinite agency, which means he's actually overpowered. Lo and behold, he's like the number 4 top lane pick in pro play, where they've got the mastery and the player skill to use the agency very well. Lo and behold, K'Sante is one of the top 4 champions in pro play in top lane. Yup, it makes sense to me, right? 45% winner K'Sante is not underpowered. Everyone's just bad at him. This is still true. This is his current tuning state. So the goal here is, let's open up the room for counterplay, because there are plenty of champions who are technically OP with mastery curves. Yone is, I think, 1 or 2% OP right now based on mastery curves. Smolder bot lane is, again, 2% OP based on mastery curves. We've got champions like Akali is, I think, 1% over right now. Let's see, what are some other good examples here? Of like ones that we don't see in pro. Silas is like 2% OP right now, based on mastery. I'm trying to think of like one more good example, and I'll move on here. Camille's like 2% also as well. And like, you know, there's plenty of champions where like they are OP, and we probably should nerf them relatively soon. But like, despite that, we're not seeing pros play them all the time. Why is that? Oh, these champions have good enough built-in counterplay that there's ways to beat them even if they're ahead, because it's been built into the kit. There are strong things you can do. And of course, you can make a champion that is very, very low agency. And in fact, like, for example, Nefuri was made to be exceptionally low agency, to say that, right, if we're going to balance around agency being a contributor here, then if you know, a high agency champion needs to be below accurate win rate, then a low agency champion needs to be above accurate win rate, which Nefuri is. And you could maybe say it's by too much, but like, the fact that her core dash is just body blocked by anyone, that's a lot of agency down when you cannot reliably reach your target champion as an assassin, unsurprisingly, right? Okay, let's now get onto the content point itself, because it's been a while. So the broad goals are to make K'Sante fairer to fight against and give him more room for counterplay. That is generally what is trying to happen. And so designer went and saw how many things can he chip away at that say, oh, K'Sante is favored here and doesn't need to be. And so basic attack range dropped by 25. Dropped by a total of 50 when he's attacking someone with his empowered passive auto attack. So he's just now 150 at all times instead of like 175 or 200. So K'Sante no longer just automatically wins all the range auto attack traits. Okay. The minimum cast time for Q and especially RQ is now much longer. The hitbox is also significantly narrower. This is still fast enough to where you can't really dodge it on reflexes. Unless you are absolutely watching, have 0 ping, and hit flash right away. You can't reflexively arcane shift this or reflexively tumble this realistically, unless K'Sante misaimed. But it does mean that because that window is so much longer and it's so much narrower, that you can be like, oh, you're going to Q here, I'm going to sidestep. And if I guessed right, that window between where I was and where I sidestepped, not only can I go farther in the time it takes you to cast the spell, but your hitbox is narrower. And so it takes less distance for me to have guessed correctly. This is often how, like, dodging hit, like, you don't typically reactively dodge things like Ezreal Q or Blitzcrank Hook. You proactively dodge because you're going to throw it, and he's got to take that guess of where it's going to actually go and where you're going to go. And the narrower a hitbox is, or the slower the missile is, or whatever, the more grace you have to make that guess yourself and not get hit. And so that's kind of the primary thing here, is that proactively dodging this Q is going to be a lot more reliable. Probably the single biggest line is this one. W cannot be re-aimed. The min channel is going down. It's still right now, I believe, 0.4 seconds. So it is still long enough where someone can see this and probably back off, probably tumble, probably something, because then he has to travel afterwards. Although if you're like currently casting a Mordekaiser Q and he hits W on you, K'Sante wins here, right? He can still reliably parry you. If you're stuck on a cast time at all, he's gonna hit, or maybe you can flash on reflex, but that's kind of it. But CC duration is going to ramp with channel. The big thing, though, is that he cannot re-aim it, which means once you see it, you can move and dodge. He no longer has the optionality. He can't do it for the trade, see a jungler and go, going backwards now. That doesn't happen anymore. More of the damage has been shifted to max HP. As mentioned, the minimum channel has been reduced. The summer channel time, all those are said. And the primary thing is, I believe the gold scaling on this ability is now in the max HP portion and not in the flat damage portion. So that is one thing that has been moved around, is generally speaking, this champion has a lot more percent HP damage, and a lot of it is coming from gold scaling here. The E, the dash speed has been reduced. R plus E no longer gives bonus range. It mirrors the basic dash. The R plus E no longer wall hops inherently, though going to an ally will still wall hop. But R plus E now gives you a cooldown and it already gave a dash speed buff, but now it also gives a cooldown buff. So I believe the dash speed buff is larger relative to the base dash speed, potentially much more slowed down. Like I slowed this down a little while ago, but it's further slowed down now to make the part of this is like the animations are more readable, which is cool, but he is especially, somewhat slower in tank form and a little bit slower, but casting it much more often when in all-out form. R is converting bonus AD into everything has percent on hit damage, on hit, on spell as well. And that damage, I believe, also gold scales. And so the idea of like turning into a skirmisher, the other thing is he gets a percent bonus armor pen, which is the Yasuo R thing, where if you're just buying a Sterak's Gauge and Merc Treads, there's nothing on this passive. But if you have like a Randwood's Omen and Steel Caps, whatever, you're cutting through 50% of that. Another big thing is you cannot cancel out of R. So in terms of giving K'Sante less agency, can't cancel out of R means you are just squishy for this entire ultimate, deal with it. You cannot re-aim W, deal with it. Q is more dodgeable, deal with it. You have less range. Like, there are a lot of K'Sante agency pieces going down. What he's getting back, though, is honestly some pretty substantial damage on the ulti. Let's go on. There's more changes we can talk about kind of down the line. So one thing that's kind of interesting, because there was, of course, the update in 13.10, and then like a follow-up, or sorry, 13.20, and then a follow-up that happened a little bit later. And so it's like, it's cool to see mechanics that were kept because they made sense. And of course, there were plenty of things that got taken away as well. I'll try to cover those as well. Still, there's attack speed on R. In fact, it's being increased, of course, with the mechanic being he gets armor penetration and max health damage instead of it just being like you get some AD. This is further playing up K'Sante the Skirmisher, right? Turning from Warden to Skirmisher says like he is just less good aggressively in tank form, right? Q is slower, range is worse, W can't re-aim. But he's actually a better skirmisher in all-out form, right? Max health damage, armor penetration, a bunch of attack speed to use that max health damage. Everything just simply scaling on bonus resists. All the AD ratios are gone. I had brought those in because the one I like the initial K'Sante, right, had AD ratios, and when you went all out, it like gave him AD and it gave him like big AD ratios on W, and I was like, okay, well, we're using AD as the thing. Okay, fine, I'll keep using AD as a thing. A much cooler idea is what's already is here right now, which is like, no, you're not getting AD. You're not getting some weird other stats. You're still getting Omnigap and stuff. That's all still there. But you're going to get max health damage on stuff and some kind of armor pen. So instead of true damage, which people get offended by seeing the white number, you get armor penetration, which still shows up Orange and Death recap, and people are way less mad about it. It's funny, but it's true. Again, these are really good changes, and I wish I had thought of them because they're really smart, they're really clever, and they help say, you are becoming a skirmisher now. You're getting the things that skirmishers need. You're getting armor penetration, you're getting max health damage, you're getting the attack speed to consistently reapply. A big thing about skirmishers is they are very, very, very repeatable. And one of the things that I had put in was a lower cooldown on W. That should make sense, right? You're casting more spells, but what it really should have been was, no, you should just get even more autos, make those actually better, let him feel more like Master Yi, but actually give him Master Yi levels of damage. And I wish I had thought of it, right? Like, these are good changes. They're really smart, good stuff here. There is still gold scaling on W. That was in the 1320 update. It's pushed more. It's into the max HP. Tap W is still gone. That was something that it wasn't even my idea to remove it, but that was in the 20 update. That's still gone. That's still removed here. The R resetting Q stacks, that's still in. The dash speed reductions, again, further built up from before, but still there. But yeah, there's several things that got removed. Obviously, the like AD ratios are gone everywhere. The magic damage on R was a really silly idea. I shouldn't have done that, but I put that in there. That was stupid. So that one's back and gone, and it's back to physical damage. There's actually some Cassante bonus health ratio damage on the wall knockback. I don't remember what else was taken away, but those were kind of the big ones. Oh yeah, the Q goes back to slowing again during All Out. That was in 20, then I took it back out later. Bunch of random stuff here, but anyway, the point is that Cassante is probably going to feel a lot more lethal in Skirmisher form, which is going to be very intentional. He's going to be squishier otherwise, just in general, and can't cancel out of R. And the hope is that this is a Cassante with enough counterplay where he can actually live at technically OP long term, but people haven't learned him yet, and that the counterplay is there such that he's not pro-jailed, and that even though Cassante might technically be 1% or even 2% overpowered when properly mastered, this champ's still only like 2 years old or so. People are still relatively new to him, and if you actually squint hard enough, these are champions that are actually long-term OP, but the player base isn't there yet. And if you one-trick it, congratulations, you're winning the games. But I'm pretty sure this is common basically everywhere. Aurelian Soul is like 3% OP if you just master him appropriately. Like, there are plenty of champions where, yeah, they might look really, really good, and they actually probably are, but plenty of these champions where people are like, they're actually bad. It's like, no, they just have mastery carries, and people haven't gotten there yet. So overall, that's kind of the rundown of Cassante changes. Let's talk about items. This is going to be broken down into basic components and then by class, line by line, what each item is getting changed. So up first, I am trying to... changing some item components. There's a bunch of epic items that are changed as well. Those are going to be in their own individual sections for each set of champions. But essentially, I want to, once again, bemoan using gold efficiency without analysis. There are plenty of components where the component value is not 100% gold efficient. So Boots of Speed are overpowered. Ether Wisp is intentionally undertuned. Amplifying Tome is overtuned. It was just buffed by 35 gold with no changes to any mage's AP ratios. But again, without AP ratio changes, the value of AP hasn't changed, just Amp Tome is a very good item. That's not a problem. That's fine. I don't mind Amp Tome being a good item. Early game spells cost mana, and mana is tightly constrained in the early game. Longswords are infinite. You can just right-click forever. I don't mind that Amp Tome is like overstated compared to Longsword. They have to deal with mana. They have to buy Sapphire Crystals, which are basically a tax on being a mage. And to be clear, what we're going to see for like the total value of Sapphire Crystal is not how I'm actually valuing this item. My gold efficiency for Sapphire Crystal, or mana in general, is 0.25 gold per point of mana. Like, Sapphire Crystal going from like 30% to 40% gold efficient here. It's still not a good item, but like Fairy Charm, Sapphire Crystal, none of these are like gold efficient in mature builds. But at level 1, it's more reasonable. Like, we've had tunings of Rejuve Bead where it was like correct to run to lane with 3 Rejuve Beads, because early regen just says you're unassailable in lane, and so you win the game automatically. And that feels really bad to play against. And so Rejuve Bead has had to be an undertuned item because you can buy it at level 1. Sapphire Crystal is basically tuned around being a level 1 item, despite the fact that it's not realistic for what mana actually costs in the game League of Legends. If you thought mana actually cost 1 gold per point, you would all stack Tear of the Goddess and get 600 mana at 1.5x the rate. Obviously you don't, because that would be stupid, but just want to point out that you cannot just look at these items and be like, gold efficiency. It just doesn't work that way. That said, though, Dagger, when I looked at everything, and I have like a big table of like every stat in the game and what I think it's actually worth, and what are some practical examples of like extrapolating that damage out long term, and what sort of levels can eventually make sense and don't. and continually retuning that based on what are the current items League of Legends, who's using them, what are their win rates, how well they're doing, how do they compare against other items, and I refine and refine and refine and refine. I may at some point publish the table, and maybe fingers crossed the wiki will update and use my numbers instead, because it will help us have better tuned items or better discussion around items. But regardless, Dagger is one where it got dropped by 2 attack speed in the 0.10 update, which to me wasn't needed. Dagger was not an overtuned component. Attack speed is just not the best DPS multiplier, and so I just dropped it by 25 gold. This actually low-key feels really, really good, because it means as an AD carry, I can recall for 250 on a Dagger, 300 on Boots 1, or 350 for a Longsword. Or in some champions, 250 for Glowing Moat, which feels really good, by the way, to get to Jenga components together. It's a really enjoyable thing. It's one thing I miss about old Amp Tome pricing, was that Ruby Crystal and Amp Tome had different price points, and so if I was building something like a Leandries, I could I have this Jenga to play here. It's really minor, whatever, but this actually feels surprisingly good to get to buy daggers for cheap. All right, first set of changes though, we are nerfing Boots again, with legendaries going down to a goal of 115% gold efficient. So actually, even before we talk about Boots here, I'm going to highlight this here, okay? So the goal is that baseline items are 115% gold efficient while trying to appropriately price all their passives. That can be hard, but thankfully there are actually enough comparisons, even across classes, right? So something like Blackfire Torch's damage burn can be relatively compared to on-hit damage. Not one-to-one, but it is repeatable damage with an obvious DPS cap, right? You can't attack more than 2.5 times a second. You can sometimes hit once and leave. Blackfire Torch, you can hit once and leave. It's not exactly the same. But of course, Blackfire Torch is also not burst damage, right? It's not Sheen, it's not Energize. It's not, active damage, go deal a burst, right? It's not doing Luden's things. And so it's closest to on-hit damage. And so you squint, you think about use cases, you think about damage over the course of the game, you think about pacing, and you're like, okay, it's this percentage as good as on-hit damage, because it means that when I'm hitting a wave with my normal combat pattern, I'm getting the minions, I'm getting them lower, I'm helping to wave clear. And by the way, this is one thing that I think players really heavily underrate. Wave clear is incredibly powerful. Interacting with minions is really, really good. One misconception I see a lot is that Sork Shoes are an early game item, or is an early game item. It's not. Amp Tome is. Because Sork Shoes don't give you wave clear. And when you're on level 3 Lysandra Q, getting 60 ability power for 1200 gold is a lot of wave clear. That is a lot of tempo, it is a lot of lane advantage, and it's actually a lot of base damage. 15 Magic Pen doesn't give you wave clear. It gives you some damage, but when you're at rank 3Q, rank 1W, rank 1E, you'd rather have 60 ability power. And so it's yeah, look, just go buy your longswords, go buy your amp tomes. Those are the items you're supposed to, that are supposed to be good, you're supposed to go buy. And then these items are other stats, right? They do other things. Okay, let's tunnel back in on items in general, because I know we're on the Boots thing. So the target goal for legendaries is 115% gold efficient. That is the initial baseline for every item. Now, they are not all there, and for many, many good reasons. The goal is not close your eyes, plug your ears, 115. Okay, so rule 1, hybrid damage durability, where damage is a meaningful portion of the power budget. It's not it's a tank item with technically Bramble Vest. It's no. If it's a damage item with durability as a factor of the item, it's 120. Basically, damage durability hybrid items are plus 5% gold efficient as a baseline. Okay? Because otherwise, why would you buy it? You can just buy a damage item, then buy a tank item, then buy a damage item, then buy a tank item. It doesn't really make sense. If we want fight items to be good, they need to be, as a per item basis, better than other items, because otherwise you'd mix and match. You just go you just kind of just go lethality, because why bother? So that makes sense there. The second thing, items with clearly anti-synergistic or fully non-synergistic stats get usually 10 to plus 15%. So for example, Ginsu's Rageblade, very, very, very few champions use the AD and AP at full value, right? Think about the total AD ratios on a kit like Draven, right? And Okay, now imagine the level of AP you have to give that kit to then also care about the Rageblade side, and it's like, it's not there. Obviously, like, Draven's never going Rageblade anyway, but most champions do not have a full kit's level of scaling on the attack damage and the ability power to where you could play full AD or full AP, and you wouldn't be a trash champion, right? Basically, Rageblade is only ever remotely considered gold efficient if your champ would normally have a full AD or a full AP build. If it doesn't have both, you cannot remotely consider Rageblade fairly statted because you can't use a full kit's worth of ability power or whatever, right? So you have to throw that out, right? You'd be like, okay, well, that's there. And this can also do things for like, oh yeah, having Sheen and crit. Those do not interact in direct ways literally at all. Or crit and on hit damage do not interact directly in any way at all because the old Rageblade passive is gone. And so things like that are very relevant. Attack speed and ability haste in a similar boat here. That's not on any items that I can think of top of my head. I guess sort of technically kind of the hex plate, but like barely. But it's like, yeah, that's a case where these things don't really coincide very well. So, you know, this needs to be +5, +10, maybe even +15 based on how severe the anti-synergies are. Because that's very relevant. It's very, very real. And so, for example, items like Trinity Force are still massively gold efficient because half the stats don't compare to each other. And that's just kind of true. The final thing is the placement of Grievous Wounds items. So Executioner's Calling and Bramble Vest to a degree and Oblivion Orb are good items. They are worth buying as the counter item. You get them and you're like, yes, I made the choice against the champion. I cut their healing down. Okay, fine. Completed Grievous Wounds items are meant to be gold inefficient, but not slot inefficient, because you had to go buy your Oblivion Orb or your Executions or whatever. You should not be taxed on like a full build axis for making the like vaguely sacrificial choice of picking in a utility item. But it does mean that we should never be in a spot where Chempunk Chainsword is the best fighter item in the game, which we've been in before, right? Where we just like, the care wasn't taken and the item was too efficient and it was just better Black Cleaver, so you just bought that item instead. And it was like, oh, I'm buying Grievous because it's the best item in the game on just a stats basis. Whoops. And so Grievous Wounds items are intentionally -5% from what it would be otherwise, while still also asking to pay for Grievous Wounds, right? It's like you're paying for Grievous Wounds and then it's going to be -5%, even after accounting for that being, you know, part of the cost of the item. And that gets us to where we are with those items, basically. The other minor thing is items that scale should be under scale, as in like Rod of Ages or tier upgrades, should be under 100% gold efficient when combined, and then around like 140%-ish when completed. Like that's the payoff scale. It's like basically -20 to +20 is the growth vector here. And so that's why there's like a late game nerf to Roa, because on combine, Roa is under, and then as fully stacked Roa, it's a little bit over, and so it was a nerf to make sense there. And one thing I want to point out as well is that player like build sentiment does not match the reality of the power level of items. It just doesn't. People have felt bad about Storm Surge for a while, despite it being actually quite good. People are finally buying it a bit more, but like the opinion had been for such a long time that item is bad. Cosmic Drive is incredibly strong. People just will not give it the time of day. But that item is very good on about 15 champions, and only Vladimir buys it. But that item is incredible. And there's room to make things OP for a bit to get people to buy them, but like there's plenty of items that are already very good that aren't getting purchased, and that's nothing to solve, but whatever. Anyway, let's now talk about boots, okay? So the goal for boots is to be 115% gold efficient after boots 1. Now, boots 1 are OP. Boots 1 are 125% gold efficient. We undercharge with flat boots on boots 1, and you know this. You all love boots 1, right? You buy regular boots really early on. You buy it whenever you can on the back. It's really, really good, and you know it. And you know that it's better than finishing your last chapter. Maybe not an exact finishing last chapter, but like if you're not hitting specifically a spike, you grab boots ASAP. And honestly, no one wants to be without boots 1 after the first item, right? Like, even if you could do something else, at some point, you always go and buy boots. You know they're very good. And if they're 100% gold efficient, why would you buy 100% gold efficient for a dead-end item that does nothing, right? Like, of course you're buying boots 1 because they're really good. And of course, yes, flat move speed is in fact not worth 13 gold or whatever. So yeah, boots are OP. That's fine. But you can't do a fair comparison of tier 2 boots if you don't account for that fact. And so the actual math on boots 2 is 150% gold efficient after boots 1. So cut 300 gold off for boots 1. And then also, these boots all give at least plus 20 move speed. So that costs 300 gold in actual fair pricing, right? Boots 1 should actually cost, 375? It was fairly priced. But no, okay, the at-rate move speed gold is 300 gold for the 20 move speed that every boots 2 gives. Okay, so what's next? Well, for the other 500 gold, Xerx gives 25 AS, which is a nerf of 5% attack speed, but yeah, that's a pretty good rate. If you want attack speed, 500 gold for 25 AS is a good deal. Okay, on to Swifties. Well, Swifties makes you pay 475 for an extra 20 MS and 25 slow resist. It's a nerf of 75 gold, but like, okay, well, 300 for this 20, and then 175 for 25 slow resist. You could maybe argue is not good enough, but I think if you could buy a little token that said, hey, get 25 slow resist, and it cost you 175 gold, you'd be like, yeah, I'd buy that. You'd sit on that for a while. You're like, oh, I'm playing against someone with Rileys or Sins or whatever. Like, yeah, get me in there. So I think Swifties are actually fairly priced like this. Lucidity boots, right? You get your 20 move speed, and for 350 gold, you get 10 haste and 10 ult haste. Sorry, this is supposed to be summoner haste. This is a typo. And yeah, 350 gold for 10 haste is probably at rate. That's fine. If you want some ability haste, congratulations, whatever. But you can't get the stat really anywhere else. Summoner haste again. And this matters. I'm pricing it at about 1/4-ish the value of regular ability haste. In which case, this item is what we think gold efficient. You're getting these stats for a pretty good rate. That is what I believe to be true. You may disagree, and that might be fair, but this to me makes sense, and it means this item is getting cheaper and is losing 5 basic haste. Mercury Treads, you are going to pay 575 after the move speed for 20 MR, which costs 400 gold, and 20 tenacity, which, yeah, right, 20 tenacity for, 175 gold. I think you'd pay that. I mean, maybe 25 slow resist for a 175 is actually a worse deal. You could make that argument. I think it's not unreasonable to make that argument. But I think, right, 175 or 20 tenacity is a deal you would happily take, which means Merc Treads are clearly still good despite being nerfed by 10 tenacity. And okay, 25 gold cheaper, but like, yep. Now, this is going to mean that there's not a lot of tenacity in the game left, right? We've pulled a lot of tenacity out. It got removed from several runes. This is going to mean a lot more crowd control, is a lot more reliable. Personally, I think that is fine. I think if lockdown is reliable and good tenacity is locked behind being a fighter for the most part by either making the sacrifice for running the shard, or getting Steric's Gauge, or getting Cleanse because you really need it, or getting a Wit's End, I think is totally fine. I think it is fine to put those things there. And I think we could buff Wits, we could buff Steric's in those cases. We could add one in the diver space as well. I think those are all reasonable things to do. But I think Merc Treads have been the best boots in the game for an incredibly, incredibly long time. This is my second time nerfing them. You can see this if you watch pro play, where pros will play Merc Treads into triple AD comps, and it's correct to do so, because Mercs are just the best boots in the game. It is actively griefing to play AP mid-jungle because you both instantly lose your role off of them just both going Merc Treads against you. If you're a tank, you're screwed. If you do magic damage, you're screwed. This item is just like really, really OP. It's the best boot in the game, I think, by a significant margin. Meanwhile, Steel Caps actually kind of sucks. Those Steel Caps for 575 gold, you get 25 armor and 10% auto attack reduction, which I would say is much worse than 20 tenacity, personal opinion here. And so it's getting dropped by 25 gold because I think the item is actually a little bit weak. Win rate data suggests really strongly that like Merc Treads are higher win rate than Steel Caps for the vast majority of champions who buy tank boots. They would much rather be in a situation where they can go buy Merc Treads. And so this is part of a long trend. And so this happened a while ago. There were nerfs to Ma of Immortus' MR a while ago. I'm trying to push down MR values to be sane relative to base MR versus armor gains and base armor and armor from items in order to have the same sort of percentage impact. So yeah, 20 MR versus 25 armor is the kind of ratio you expect to see a lot going forward with these kind of item changes, is to try to make incremental magic resist purchases less sharp against mages, because ultimately there are slightly fewer multipliers in the AP system, and that system being a little bit less closed and having less of an arms race going on because like they don't have crit, for example, is intentional here. So there's the boot changes. Move on to fighters. So fighter epics are getting buffed in most cases. Warhammer 50 gold cheaper, Hearthbound Axe 100 gold cheaper. Rectrix is actually a nerf, -5 AD for 125 gold is generally a weaker item. And Wing Moonplate is actually getting buffed. 50 health for 1 move speed is generally gold efficient positive. All right, we first start with the squishy set, Skirmishers and Casters. Blade of the Rune King, not far from what you saw before. Minus 10 AD, not a huge deal here, but it is a bit of a weaker item. Kraken Slayer, minus 5 AD, minus 1% move speed, and the on-hit damage does not scale nearly as strong with champion level anymore, so you're going to lose some late game damage. Rage Blade, very, very minor hit, 5 AD, 5 AP, not a very big deal. Rage Blade is going to be a lot stronger of an item. Terminus, only minus 5 AD. You're seeing a lot of these on-hit items just weren't very good, and so the on-hit space is going to look a lot nicer for this kind of set, that these skirmishers can feel a lot better with their on-hit items. Wits End, minus 5 MR down to 45, minus 5 attack speed, and the on-hit damage going down late. But it means that Wits End is going to be a little worse at shutting down AP champions. It's, of course, going to be less of a late game damage item. And this basically allows Wits End to be actually have a decent portion of its power budget expressed in defense in the 45 MR. Because so much of the power of the item was actually just the late game set you have on hit damage. And it was just like really, really, really high offense item with, again, 75 late game on hit with, 50 or so attack speed. It was just like, this had a lot of damage and barely any resists. And it's like, no, this has tenacity. It has enough MR to make a dent in magic damage coming in, while still being a damage item with solid AS, solid on hit damage. And it's inexpensive. Eclipse, no proc damage. Basically, this is, to me, more a skirmisher item than a caster item. Skirmisher is not really a burst class. It is high sustained DPS. They will kill you quickly, but they're not killing you in 2 autos. And so Eclipse was made initially as an assassin item. It was made as a mythic. It was an assassin item for when assassins needed to go kill tanks. So it had a mythic passive of armor penetration, it had lifesteal, and it had max health damage on the proc. And then it was not an assassin item anymore. It lost its mythic passive, lost lethality, lost lifesteal, but it still had that old mythic lethality anti-tank item of max health damage. Now I realize that skirmishers tend to want to be target agnostic, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, it is still a very, very strong AD haste stat stick with a very good shield. This shield has very, very strong bonus AD scaling. It has a solid base. It has a very low cooldown. If you are running Eclipse on a skirmisher, you will have multiple shields per fight, and you will have very high sustained damage with high AD, high haste. It is basically the most AD per gold you can buy in the game. It is a very good damage stat stick with a solid defensive option attached to it that basically makes it skirmisher shaped. It has some defense on a damage item. Manamune is getting minus 5 AD. Murmana is inheriting that minus 5 AD. The on-hit damage is getting dropped from 1.5% max mana to 1% max mana. The on-spell effect for melee champions is going from 3.5% max mana and a 0.06 AD ratio, which bonus AD, which to be clear, on 200 bonus AD was 12? Whatever, basically, right? To just here 4% max 4% max mana, no bonus AD. That AD ratio was vestigial. It was just kind of there, whatever. This just kind of makes it a little more simplified. Yeah, less on hit damage, more spell damage. So Murmana is going to basically be a better caster item. If you want good caster spell damage, here you go. This item is one of the least nerfed items. It's still got good haste. It's still got very, very good attack damage. It still has some on hit damage, but again, this item was used for the spellcasters, and so play out the spellcaster side of it. Ravenous Hydra, minus 5 haste, minus 5 AD. Now, one thing I want to keep in mind, right, is when nerfing items by about 10%, and to be fair, the average fighter item was nerfed by, I think it was 8.3% was the mean gold efficiency lost across all items that were deemed fighter here. That when your item is much bigger, it takes more to take 10% off the item. Because keep in mind, a lot of these items are like 145% gold efficient, which means they gotta go from 145. If they're gonna lose 10%, they're gonna go from 145 to like 130, which is 14% of a 3,300 gold item, which is 450 gold worth of stats, right? That's a 10% nerf to an overstated expensive item. Is a lot getting pulled off the item. And so, yes, in fact, per price tag, or like per slot, Ravenous Hydra is losing more stats. But like per gold, not really, right? It's 30% more expensive than something like Eclipse. And so it's not the same comparison. Either way, 5 haste, 5 AD, 20% damage off the active, and not getting bonus, not getting 1.5x lifesteal effectiveness on the active healing. And this item still has full power lifesteal on a baseline anyway. Still has full power or nearly full power wave clear on the passive. It is still a really good sustain option if you are not a high attack speed auto attacker for Blade of the Rune King. This is your AD haste lifesteal item that is still there. You are losing 0.2 total AD every 10 seconds, which is like 40 damage every 10 seconds. That's not a lot of burst loss, right? That's just not a lot of burst lost. But yeah, it's going down. Your passive wave clear, basically untouched. But yeah, a little bit less damage. What it's keeping? The overall lifesteal, the overall sustain on this item. And it's still very gold efficient, still very good. It's a damage with a little bit of durability, skirmisher size item. Trinity Force, -5 haste, -3 attack speed, -9 AD, plus 33 health. This item is so expensive that 300 HP is basically under rate for durability per like gold on a fighter item. One thing that also happens here, by the way, is with this -5 haste, this now means all the numbers are multiples of 3. Now, to be fair, 33 AS already was, as was 45 attack damage, but now it's 36 attack damage XD. I'm cute. And ultimately, like, Trinity Force has a lot of damage because Spellblade is a lot of damage. 2x your base AD is a lot of damage every 2-ish seconds in actual practice. This item is very lethal, very, very high damage. And it's still quite good. On to diver items. So diver items tend to be marked by being between 30 and 40% of their gold is earmarked towards durability, whereas skirmishers was usually 20 to 30%. Divers are 30 to 40. So Black Cleaver is -15 AD. Black Cleaver used to have this much AD and health and haste and cleave and shred as before, but just going down, this was one of the most overtuned items. And yeah, it is just getting shipped back down to be right in the middle. It is diver shaped, so it's a little bit tanky for a skirmisher, but they can get Terminus, they can maybe get Last Whisper, they can maybe get Cyrilda's. I actually forgot to put Cyrilda's in here, but Cyrilda is back. Cyrilda's is straight up 30% arm penetration, with not a lot changing otherwise. It's just going to be pretty effective, I think. But you have Cyrilda's as a very clear caster percent arm pen item, but you've got Black Cleaver here as diver sized. If you want to kind of come down as a Juggernaut and go a little bit squishy and buy this item, you can. It's still 400 health in the slot, which isn't too bad. Kempuk Chainsword is being grown up to be diver sized. It is becoming more expensive, 3,100 gold, right? It's meant to be slot efficient, not gold efficient. -10 AD, 200 health, 300 gold is a nerf to the item, don't get me wrong, but it is now diver size, so it's only a little bit small for a Juggernaut and only a little bit beefy for a skirmisher, instead of being too small for most fighters that feel comfortable holding this item late game. Death Stance, just weaker than most other fighter items. Simple 100 gold nerf is not a very big nerf. So Death Stance is going to be a stronger item overall, especially relative to everything else. Most items did not get away with a 100 gold nerf, so Death Stance, relatively to everything else, is a better item. Experimental Hexplate, -15 AD, -5 attack speed, +1 health. This again makes Hexplate diver sized. The most common builders of these items are like Nocturne and Olaf, who are a diver and I would argue a Juggernaut respectively. And so diver size puts it in the middle of all fighters. Now, to be clear, I don't think this item is perfectly designed. I think it's got a user base problem. There are very, very few attack speed focused fighters who are ult based. That is really rare, as it turns out, and so it's got a really, really small niche. This item is still good on those champions, and relative to other items, it maybe is nerfed less than them, but this item is appropriately roughly gold efficient, and is diver size with that in the middle of the fighter space. Hex Drinker, -5 MR, so a little bit less lane countering against mages. Ma, no MR change here, but -10 AD, and the AD ratio has been cut by about, what, 1/6 or so, which means shields are lower and the damage of the item is lower. Ultimately, Hex Drinker was overly efficient, and I'm basically undervaluing the shield because it only blocks magic damage. Shields often get wasted. There can be plenty of fights where you're just not fighting magic damage at all, and so the shield does literally nothing because no one ever triggers it. All those things are relevant here. They all matter, and so even with discounting the shield to like 1/3 value, this item is still like overly efficient. It's very, very strong. It's still got a solid amount of AD, solid amount of haste. It is just barely diver sized because of the lifesteal that comes in at the end, and the fact that it has shield and MR and lifesteal. Like, this item is actually quite good, and so it just, shouldn't crowd out mages too much. And so with Hex Drinker being a slightly weaker item, hopefully mages can feel pretty good here. Spear of Shojin, I thought, did not need any ult haste. The actual change is there is no generic haste at all, but the basic haste unique has been buffed. At functional practice, it's -20 ult haste, -10 basic haste. Also -10 AD, but get some health. This means Spear of Shojin has been pushed toward being diver-sized here. Obviously, we might see some skirmishes go for it. I can see a world where you try to do this on someone like Riven. But it's being put in the middle because, to me, this makes the most sense. Sort of like the midpoint of fighters, which is what divers kind of are. Stride Breaker getting a nerf here as well. It is also diverse size. It's fine. It's a big Nocturne item. Totally reasonable. Minus 10 AD, minus 5 AS, minus Phage passive. Several nerfs here, but again, Stride Breaker is a 3,300 gold item. And so the total amount of stats of the item are very high. So a 10% nerf has to be more than a 10% nerf to a 2,800 gold item. And then Sundered Sky here, also just a little bit too good. Minus 5 haste, minus 5 AD. This one actually gets minus 50 health and some minus on the healing as well. This item actually has a lot of defense on it, as it is already, but it's still solidly mid-sized here. So you'll notice that so far, all we've seen are mostly damage nerfs and very few durability nerfs, and in fact, several durability buffs. Juggernaut items, these are the ones that have been, to some degree, reshaped the most. So Abyssal Mask basically doesn't really have any core support purchasers. Like when I reshaped Abyssal into being a percent pen item, I said, okay, let's place it for Juggernauts as well as support tanks and see what happens. And overwhelmingly, the user base is Juggernauts. And that's fine. It's a big Amumu item. It's a big Zac item. Totally cool with that. Was very willing for that to be the user base. So let's actually grow it up to be relatively fair for them. It is now Juggernaut / tank instead of Juggernaut / support. And so, this being a reasonable, like, Malphite kind of item here as well, just like the level of gold that tank, champions earn, that's fine. So, plus 150 gold, plus 5 haste, minus 5 MR, and minus 10 to the MR per champion aura. So Abyssal Mask is now just stat, shred, and that's it. Which I think is a completely reasonable item. It tells what it's supposed to do. It's, I think, very straightforward. It's very obvious. It is minus 5 MR. In fact, in actual practice, it's minus 15 to 25 MR or more. So for all the mage players saying that, like, I can't believe Riot lied and said they're not removing MR, or lowering MR and stuff, I'm going to tell you. But ultimately, this is going to be a slightly more selfish item because it doesn't need to be carrying like this aura weight here. You still have the MR shred aura that's still there and all that stuff, but Abyssal Mask, generally speaking, is still going to be nerfed because we're nerfing everything. Dead Man's Plate, arguably actually a buff here. Dead Man's Plate really doesn't have that many users. You have to be really, really specific to want exactly move speed, and then even then, I'm trying to lower the amount of move speed in the game overall. So the max move speed you can get from Shipwrecker going down by 20, the flat percent MS in the item going down by 1%, but it's gaining 50 health and 10 MR. This is meant to be a Juggernaut item. It's meant to be sort of tank Juggernaut hybrid, so it's meant to be mostly about durability, and so kind of playing up the durability aspect of this. It does have some damage on it, whatever, but playing up the durability, playing down the move speed, so that it can look a little bit more like a tankier Juggernaut item. Hullbreaker is probably the most reshaped of the items here. It is losing some flat ID, it is getting a lot of health, and it's losing 1% move speed, as a lot of things are. But the big change is actually a buff to the on-hit damage, and what you'll see on PBE on Thursday is a reshape to how the on-hit damage is calculated. It's going to be more about the max health portion and less about the base AD. So to me, Hullbreaker and Titanic Hydra had a very strong overlap that I wanted to separate. Titanic Hydra is a Hydra item. It is there to give you wave clear, and it has an active that deals damage. Now, because we'll get to like Hydra a little bit later, but it's like, yes, the on-hit damage is going away in Titanic Hydra. But right, Hydra items are about dealing AoE damage and giving you wave clear when you want it. And so you can go and splurge and buy your expensive Hydra item and get wave clear when you didn't have it. But you wanted some attack damage and other stuff. You didn't want to go Sunfire Cape. Okay, fine. That's there. You have that. Hullbreaker is explicitly a health scaling on-hit item. It is very hard for Hullbreaker to make sense when Titanic Hydra does that, but better. The math of Titanic Hydra's on-hit damage was just simply higher than Hullbreaker's on-hit damage, while also giving a bunch of AoE and an active, a bunch of other stuff, and it's like, oh, why would anyone ever go Hullbreaker? Titanic is just this item, it's just this item, but better. So Titanic is going to live in its niche of being a AoE item, we'll talk about it more later, and Hullbreaker is going to be the, basically, Juggernaut on-hit conversion item. And now Hullbreaker is going to be, as mentioned in other cases, overly gold efficient, because unlike other champions use on hit damage, Juggernauts do not have access to attack speed. They can kind of try to go Stride Breaker, but Stride Breaker is not even that much of a Juggernaut item, really. And so the end result is, here's Hullbreaker. It has significant health scaling for on-hit damage. We know you can't get things like Rage Blade. We know you're going to have a hard time getting things like percent armor penetration, because Cleaver can sometimes be unwieldy for you. Sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't, of course. Here, go have solid on-hit damage and feel good about it, but also let's move the stats around. Now, to be fair, the actual stat stitching of Hullbreaker is diver-sized. There's still so much AD and on-hit damage that it's functionally 2/3 damage, 1/3 durability. but because of the aggressive health scaling on the item, and the fact that on-hit damage is health scaled, to me it still is a Juggernaut item. It still does give 500 health or so, which should make it feel reasonably beefy, but it does have just a lot of damage overall on the item itself. Next up is Overlord's Bloodmail. This item was overall just a little bit too narrow in its usability. Minus sanity, 50 health is of course still a nerf, but it's one of the smallest nerfs possible here. This is 350 gold. This is worth 133 or so. So like, we're not yet. It's like minus 200, I guess, but that's not that bad. Steris Gauge loses a 5% base AD as bonus AD, and loses 1/4 off the shield from 60% bonus health, or from 80% to 60% bonus health. So a damage nerf and durability nerf. That said, a lot of the Steris Gauge shield was, since it decayed, you often didn't get the full value. Regardless, just tapping down Steris Gauge. So Titanic Hydra is getting 50 health to make it Juggernaut sized. And yes, it is losing the single target on hit damage. The passive AoE is still there. The active damage and auto reset is still there. And even though the active damage on press is not as high as comparable build things like Ravenous, Profane, or even Stride, it's an auto attack reset, which means it does have functional single target damage here. Especially if you combo it with things like Hullbreaker, which actually wants to accelerate towards the next auto sooner rather than later. And Hullbreaker and Titanic, so Hullbreaker is the on-hit damage. Titanic Hydra, the point is, this is Juggernaut Wave Clear. If you don't want Juggernaut Wave Clear, that's fine, you have to buy it, but that is the point of the item, that it is Juggernaut Wave Clear. This is the Juggernaut Wave Clear item, that is who it's for, that is going to do. The Wave Clear scales with bonus health, so that you can go and buy a Sunfire Cape, or you can go and buy a Dead Man's Plate, and that's going to scale the damage of this item, in the way that Ravenous Hydra and Stridebreaker won't have that. That's totally fine. Have fun. This is here for you. It also still scales on level because of total HP. That's fine. But it has an express purpose. Now, if this item is weak, okay, we'll have to see if we need to nerf things around it, or if we can give it a little more somewhere else. But at the end of the day, the purpose of the item is, yes, it's narrow. It is Juggernaut Wave Clear. Is that fairly niche? Yes. Also, I think that's fine. Iceborne Gauntlet is being grown to be between a Juggernaut and tank item. Some of these items are made bigger because Juggernauts we expect to actually earn some gold and then buy these items. So like Mordekaiser should maybe start feeling better about Abyssal Mask, for example. Iceborne Gauntlet meant to look good here for some fighters who don't want skirmisher-sized Trinity Force and might want Juggernaut or tank-sized Iceborne Gauntlet. So make this item a little bit more about the damage. So it is getting more expensive. But it's also getting a 50% sheen attached to it, so going from 1.0 sheen to 1.5 sheen, which is a pretty big deal. It's pretty close to Triforce at this point. And the slow is getting heavily front-loaded. Ultimately, you're getting a 30% slow on your sheens the moment you buy this item. That's pretty good. It's still 50% value for range, so it's a 15% slow for range. I don't expect this to be great on Ezreal, but I guess we'll see. It's a 1.5x sheen with a 15% slow attached. It's not trash, but I still expect Triforce to be better. I guess we'll see, though. But ultimately, this is a more front-loaded item, and a lot of the point here is to make tank-type items better early game, to give tanks a stronger laning phase and let them feel good about them and the lane opponent hitting a one-item spike, or even just hitting first epic and tanks still feeling good. We'll talk about tanks towards the end. They're actually going to be the last set of slides. But also one thing to point out, just in general, with these fighter items generally getting more HP on them, is that tank items are giving more resists in general on average, and so the willingness to buy a tank item is going to be better when your health is higher and these resists are going to be higher waiting for you. Moving on to the AD carry system, the next set of AD items. Warhammer, again, cheaper by 50 gold. Hearthmount Axe cheaper by 100 gold. Retro's nerfed a little bit. Noon Quiver, minus 5 AD for minus 100 gold is overall a nerf. Slingshot was just underpowered, so minus 200 gold straight up, no other compensation. It's just getting cheaper. Zeal is getting 100 gold more expensive and losing 1% move speed. Zeal was, I think, pretty clearly an overtuned item, and it's finally at more appropriate here. All right, non-crit legendaries. Blade of the Rune King, again, bringing it back on range users, minus 10 AD. Kraken Slayer, minus 5 AD, minus 1 move speed, and the on-hit damage is being dropped down in the late game. Rage Blade, minus 5 AD, minus 5 AP, not a big deal. Terminus, minus 5 AD. So again, on-hit champions getting out pretty cleanly. Manamune, on-hit damage still nerfed by a third. And I forgot to switch this one. This is I think 2.7% max mana plus 0.06 becomes 2% max mana plus not. I Control-C Control-V didn't change the number, so my bad here. Muramana is somewhat meaningfully nerfed for range users here. Trinity Force, again, minus 5 AD, minus 3 attack speed. Minus 5 haste, minus 3 attack speed, minus 9 AD, a little bit of health. Okay, cool. Auto crit legendaries. Collector, minus lethality, 200 gold more expensive. This is actually a relatively small nerf. This is 280 gold worth of nerf, which I don't think is that big of a deal. This is less than 10 AD in terms of actual practice. Essence Reaver is definitely a very big nerf. To be fair, this is an item that, like, every time I look at it, the numbers are just absolutely absurd on this item. This item is still, like, on the high side for gold efficiency. The hope here is that ER stands out as, like, clearly cheaper than Collector, more, I think it's like at least as much or more AD than Collector, and gives haste instead of lethality, and gives infinite mana. And it's like, hopefully that comparison point stands out, is like, no, I can grab ER and feel good, is kind of the fingers crossed moment on this one. Infinity Edge is 200 gold more expensive and minus 10 AD, so a pretty meaningful hit here as well. This is hopefully going to move it a little bit away from being the obvious baseline capstone, or sorry, the low-key best first item in the game, and instead be the obvious capstone. LDR symbol minus 10 AD, not much to say here. What a reminder, minus 5% armor penetration and plus 200 gold, so trying to make sure it is under gold efficiency compared to something like LDR. Every Zeal item lasts 3 to 4% move speed and got 50 gold more expensive. Generally speaking, this is not a very big damage nerf to them, with the exception of RFC that lost 20 energized damage, because it had a little bit more room here for getting nerfs overall. But this means that, hey, attack speed has been untouched in these places specifically. Yuntal Wild Arrows function of the passive was crit damage. Percent total AD on crit is crit damage, is another name. So it's been converted to a flat 80 damage on crit, which is not exciting, but it's only losing 5 AD, so Yuntal could conceivably be a good first AD item if you don't need lethality and you don't want haste on Essence Reaver, you don't need the mana. Yuntal is a solid AD crit stat stick that, yes, the on-hit damage technically will scale, but at least it's scaling with gold and not level, so it might not get mid-stillen. And the idea of going like Yuntal, Hurricane, IE, I think can be actually a quite compelling build, and you can like go spread bleeds to people and feel pretty good about them. This tuning, by the way, is like, it's about the same item, or like the same on-hit damage on 2 items, and otherwise it's only getting minus 5 AD, so like one of the least nerfs items here in the game. On to lethality space, this is primarily minus haste and not much else. So Axiomark minus 5 haste. The passive is getting buffed up to 33 lethality, then a little bit nerfed afterwards. So a little bit less ulti refresh as you go into further and further into your build. But yep, less refresh than Axiomark. The big thing here for lethality is giving assassins less haste, because they are meant to kind of retain their burst. And if we're going to pull things out, I'm not pulling back on the burst as much as I can. Edge of Night as a... What's funny is Edge of Night is not really fully a defensive item because of the spell shield. The spell shield says you can't peel me. Like, if this said have, like... If it was just like, here's some health and MR, it's like, oh, it's a defensive item. Okay, yeah, and it can, like, you know, be considered a defensive item where you're, like, behind or taking a side grade or whatever. But Edge of Night frequently gets rid of the ability to peel, and so... Yeah, his item is just like, well, it's very good. And again, 200 gold is not a huge nerf, but it's there. Hubris loses 5 haste. Hubris is probably one of the weakest lethality items in the game right now, so minus 5 haste is getting off pretty light. Opportunity, losing 1% move speed, losing 5 AD, and the unique passive, so the base haste item is getting dropped by 3, but the unique passive haste, instead of going from 5 to 10 by levels, is going to be 10 flat, which means that if you're using the passive, the lethality on the item is getting shifted from 23 to 25 to just be, or 23 to 28 to just always be 25. That's based on level, right? So like the break even here is level 13 or something, but otherwise it's like, and even then it's like, okay, well, the numbers aren't that different anymore. It doesn't really matter here anyway. So it's 1 move speed and 5 AD is the real change. Profane Hydra, trying again to say that lethality items are not about haste. Lethality items give 10 haste for Axiomark, which has 20, and that's it. They give 0, 10, or 20, and those are the numbers. And this is the only one with 20. So Profane Hydra goes down to 10 haste. It's getting cheaper because we took a lot of this item. It's losing 20% of the damage off of the passive auto if you're a melee champion. It was doing 50% total AD. Now it's going to 40% total AD, which matches the other Tiamats. There's actually a bug, or an unintended change, or an unintended number here. I talked to the designer who built this item. Profane Hydra currently, the passive radius matches the active radius, and it is the only Tiamat with a 450 passive radius. So that's getting brought down to 350, matching all the other Tiamats in the game. As well as the passive going from 50% total to 40% total, and the active damage going down by 20 to 40%, based on how low the champion was. As much as people like to believe they only ever did the active only when the enemies were low, that's false. This thing had a 10-second cooldown. You're casting that thing whenever you could. Sometimes you would wait if you're doing a full combo. That's cute, but very often you just press this thing. Sometimes only 20% less damage. Trust. So, in terms of actual burst damage, again, you're losing, 20. You're losing, 20% of 230 AD on a very, very light damage. Yeah, it's 45 damage off your proc. Absolutely, right? That matters. But also, this item is like, okay, here's 45 less damage on my entire 2000 damage burst combo, and the item is cheaper. And the haste doesn't matter because I'm doing a burst combo. Like, I don't know. This item is not ruined, I don't think, personally, but whatever. Armor Glaive kind of sucks. -5 haste only. We'll take Cyclo Sword, -5 haste plus 100 gold. Not a huge nerf. Yuma's Ghostblade actually not losing very much at all. 100 gold more expensive, and then -20 on the passive melee move speed. There's a chance Yomu's becomes a default ranged purchase here. If we have to unwind this a little bit more, we will, but we'll see. Yomu's looking pretty good. We'll see what happens, though. Right now, it has basically no real ranged users, so with everything nerfed around it, we might see some people move over. That's probably going to be okay, but we'll see. On to the ability power system now. Of course, there are 3 broad sets of AP users, right? There's burst champions, champions who aren't necessarily bursty, and HP users, which could be like skirmishers like Gwen, or juggernauts like Mordekaiser, and they can all be kind of in this space. So Ether Wisp, overpowered component, -1% move speed plus 50 gold. Vintage Codex, 2 weak, -50 gold. Healer's Dodge Rod, -5 AP. Just overly efficient. Arm Guard, -5 AP, overly efficient. Verdant Barrier, -5 MR, overly efficient. And Oblivion Orb, -5 AP, overly efficient here as well. The primary thing is trying to make Arm Guard have more armor than Verdant Barrier has MR, because this makes sense, and I'm just trying to make them consistent across these components, do it everywhere I can. But again, these items were a little bit too good as epics. And mana AP items. These are all the last chapter items. I actually should have included Roa and didn't, but it's in the health section, so it's fine. Archangel loses 10 flat AP, and loses 50 base on the shield, so it cares a little bit more about the mana scaling. Blackfire Torch is -5 haste, -10 ability power, but the burn is better up until 500 AP, which is the vast majority of the time you're playing League of Legends. Now, I know the design intent of Blackfire Torch is to be better on high AP users, and that's why Blackfire Torch has a mini Death Cap passive on it. That is very good. It is very strong. That is part of the power of the item. So Blackfire Torch. One thing I'll point out as well is it's not quite in order, but these items now all have different amounts of ability haste. Archangels has 25, Torch has 20, Malignants has 15, Ludens has 10. So which chapter item you buy should be fairly contingent on what kind of champion you are being, right? Archangels gives you durability, says, no, I'm really, really about repeatability. You can't be bursted, get a second rotation now. Blackfire Torch is next, saying, yes, I want to get everyone on fire so that I can cast extra spells and hit them again now that I have bonus AP and everything else, and I want to, light them on fire again, right, with the extra damage. Malignance is kind of in the middle. It says it wants to have some repeatability. It gives you some ulti haste. The combined ulti haste is still 35 with the base item and the unique, I think. And overall, just, hey, the item is a little bit under, so 10 haste or 5 AP is not that big of a nerf. Then Ludens is already relatively common. We're nerfing on these items. -10 haste flat out. Not a huge concern as far as I'm concerned. You still have 95 AP in the slot. It's still relatively inexpensive. It's still a lot of burst. It has actually the highest burst proc in the AP system, outside of like late game Lichbane stuff. So yeah, what this means, by the way, is if you're playing a burst mage and you really want haste, you'll have to sacrifice burst for it. Like, the big thing I want to point out with this item system overall, and these changes overall, is that you can't just get everything anymore. Do you want to be tanky with your mage items and buy a Ryle's and a Leandry's? Okay, well, you got 800 bonus health. You don't have all as much damage anymore, because you got a ton of bonus health. That's a sacrifice you have to actually make. Do you want ability haste in every slot? All right, well, you have less ability power, because you got 100 haste, which is really high, and only, like, it was never possible to get 50% CDR like until Mythics came out, and we made ability haste a stat. But before, the hard cap was 45. That was with a specific mastery in the game, which was functionally equivalent to about 90 haste. And it's like, it's not that hard to get 90 haste in modern League of Legends. Runes help, your boots can help, and your first 3 items can help. And it's like, yeah, if you want that level of CDR, you have to make some real sacrifices in durability or damage, or have some downtime. I think the game should have more downtime overall. And if you want to be bursty, that's great. You can have low CDR. There were plenty of mages that like played the entire game at 20 CDR back in the day, and they can do it again. League of Legends totally functioned in 2015. Trust me, you can still play the game. So everyone's losing something, and if you want to be a burst mage, you are losing a lot of haste, and that is how it's going to work. And other champs losing other stuff, and that's what the game is meant to be. As far as I'm concerned, you just aren't allowed to get everything anymore. So here's the rest of the non-health AP items. I either made an implementation mistake or the PBE post on Reddit is wrong. Banshee is meant to be 3,000 gold, not it's meant to be 100 gold cheaper, not 200 gold more expensive. So it's minus 10 MR, minus 15 AP, but also minus 100 gold. Again, this is still a nerf, don't get me wrong. But Banshees to me is criminally underpurchased for how strong it is. One thing I'm trying to do here with a lot of these changes is to make double AP comps a lot more viable. Making Abyssal Mask a good item was part of this. Making sure Crypt Bloom and Void Staff are solid items as part of this. Void Staff, by the way, is entirely unnerfed in this patch. But like Abyssal Mask is real and exists. Merc Treads have been nerfed twice now this year. You'll see several MR items like be meaningfully weaker or are uncommon in general already. And the goal is to try to let you be able to play double AP carry and not get screwed over by the item system. And some of that is the single Orianna buys Banshees and laughs at you and is now immune to your entire kit. Because 50 MR is a lot, plus a spell shield. So less efficiency. Crypt Bloom, minus 10 AP, but the heal is better until 200 ability power. This actually means that Crypt Bloom can be another option to be a slightly more supportive AP support item, kind of. So the idea of I kind of like that Rylays is pretty heavily skewed toward utility, so that when your support is playing Zyra or Brand or whatever, or Heimerdinger, they can buy this item that says, even though I'm playing a mage, I can at least help my team kite, but it still feels good for me to use. If Crypt Bloom can feel really good as a either selfless mage item for the mage who wants to just buy something cheap and get out of the pen system fast, or be actually a good option for support mages and front load the heal here a little bit. And in fact, this could be higher with a lower ratio even further, and it could break even at 400 AP and just be strong or whatever. I think there's totally room for that to be there and feel good and be fine for a lower AP version. There's even a world where Crypt Bloom has health on it and it's the Skirmisher Gwen % pen item, because she doesn't really have one. Abyssal Mask doesn't make sense on her, and neither does anything else. So I could totally see a redesign where Crypt Bloom has 200 HP or something. I'm not sure that's actually going to happen, but it is a possible option here. Regardless, Horizon Focus, minus 15 AP, but plus 5 haste. So Horizon Focus is a 25 haste item. This, I believe, if I recall correctly, is only on Horizon Focus, Seraph's Embrace, and Cosmic Drive. So if you want to get a bunch of haste, those are your items, and they're all, right? This is the only non-durability 25 haste item, which is a pretty big deal here, and should be a really meaningful consideration where, and keep in mind, right, this item is 2,700 gold. It's very, very cheap, and it has a 10% damage amp with almost 100% uptime, which is a really, really good damage mod. 10% damage amp, 25 haste, and non-trivial ability power for 2,700 gold is a really good slot. In a world where not everything else is also overpowered, that's pretty good. Lichbane, just again continuing to shift it towards, hey, this is the item for being bursty and an assassin. Minus 5 ability haste, minus 4% flat move speed is a pretty big deal. Minus 5% on the AP ratio for late game burst, but 15 more flat AP. Basically says Lichbane is a really, really good first item. It already is kind of the default AP assassin slot 1. That's fine. It is still there. Go have fun. This is for you. This is a good item. Nashor's Tooth, minus 10 flat AP, minus 5% AP ratio here as well. Again, fairly simple nerfs here. Nashor's Tooth, again, one of those slightly more expensive items, so it goes down. Rabadon's Death Cap, minus 10 AP and minus 5% on the AP ratio here as well. This is fairly meaningful, but it's still going to be the best thing to buy when you can afford it. Shadow Flame has already had a fair number of reshapes. I think Shadow Flame is significantly overrated. I don't think this item is actually all that good. So it's very light changes here. It's minus 5 ability power, and the dot and pet modifier is being rolled down to match the generic modifier. Ultimately, I think that the fact that you have a dot in the first place already makes Shadow Flame better for you, because you can never miss on the damage. It is relatively easy for say you're playing Xerath to hit someone at 21% health and then hit them, or 26 or whatever, and then hit them when they're actually I know it got moved up to 40 or whatever, but hit them when they're above the threshold and then hit them again when you would have one-shot them anyway. Whereas it's basically impossible for Malzahar or Brand or Lily Pass or anything to ever fail to get maximum value out of the dot. So I don't think it needs the help at all. Anyone who's hitting fast and repeatable is already going to feel good about this. And in general, I just would rather this item be sharply for burst mages, and to me that makes more sense. And so that's where I move this item. Storm Surge, I basically am just cutting down a lot of the move speed stuff here. So minus 1% flat move speed, minus 10% and a half-second duration on the move speed burst, which is fairly relevant here as well. And then reshifting the unique damage to be basically worse after 200 AP, which is pretty much right away. Like if you're not buying this item first, it's going to be weaker overall. So it is still a damage nerf here, but again, this item is, yeah, I mean, this item is actually better than Shadow Flame in its statistics, but people are just like allergic to buying it for some reason. Either way, Storm Surge is a lot different from where it was when it came out initially. The proc damage is generally lower, but there's no longer a range penalty, and yeah. And then Zhonya's just minus 15 AP. It is still much more expensive than Banshee's Veil. Yeah, not much else to say here. It is, you're paying for an active, minus 15 AP is a pretty meaningful nerf compared to some of the other ones. Okay, we move on to the health AP system. This, of course, could be AP juggernauts like kind of a Mumu, kind of Mordekaiser, as well as skirmishers like Lilia or Gwen, or battle mages like Ryze, Swain, Cassiopeia, as long as their kit tuning says they like building health AP. Abyssal Mask, once again, exists. It's, again, more expensive, plus haste, minus MR aura. Cosmic Drive is minus 1% move speed, minus 10 AP. The move speed on the passive is getting lowered, but the rule's getting much, much better. So Cosmic Drive right now says gain move speed for 2 seconds on an ability hit on a champion. Those are both very narrow, which means it is on very, very rarely. It is on sometimes and only in combat. The rules getting changed to be functionally phage rules. So phage nuts upgrades say gain 20 move speed when you deal any physical damage. This will be gain 20 move speed when you deal any magic or true damage. And because magic damage tends to be spread out more because you have cooldowns sometimes, like Annie can't deal magic damage every 2 seconds in the way that anyone can deal physical damage every 2 seconds, the duration is up to 3 seconds here. So again, the highs of the move speed are not going to be as high. You are not getting level 1860 MS. And the funny thing is, this still annoys me that people are quoting this item as though they actually had this item at level 18. Like, keep in mind, Vladimir buys this item slot 1. So at like level 9 or whatever, this item is giving him like 23 move speed. Or I guess it would be 22 move speed at level 9. It's not giving him 20. Oh no, the horror. 2 move speed only when I hit a spell on champions. And the duration is lower than my cooldowns. And now it's like, okay, well, it's all right, you lost 2 move speed, and now it's up for everything. Because if you Q a minion, you get 20 move speed. If you W under minion wave, you get 20 move speed. You press E and hit some minions, you get 20 move speed. Yeah, it doesn't stack, but it lasts long enough. You'll just get this effect. So this is a relatively big deal. This matters, and like the usability, I hope people will kind of realize, like, and I want to point out something as well. Cosmic Drive is already actually overpowered. This item is very, very, very good. It has, like, whenever champions buy it, it is basically best in slot win rate every time, but no one buys it. Unfortunately, Cosmic Drive does not have the flashy, unique passive that says, oh, here's why I get this turnaround. One thing I thought of, and it's not going to be for this patch, so it's not going to happen anytime soon, but like giving this item slow resist or tenacity to say, hey, you buy this so they can't lock you down for these AP users, and it will be like diver size and durability. So if you're going to play Gwen or Singe, it's like not that big of a reach for you on either side. But like, unfortunately, there's nothing flashy says this item is amazing, but this item is really amazing. Please, please buy this item. It's really, really good. But people are really slow to identify this item is amazing. Rocket Belt is getting one of the lighter touches here, 10 AP, 50 health. Not a huge deal, but wanted to make sure it was more sort of diver sized in its durability overall. I think Assassins just will generally go for something like a Lichbane, and so this is meant to be more like on the diver side here. Landry's minus 20 AP, one of the bigger hits here. Landry's is the single best AP item in the game right now. 20 AP is arguably the biggest nerf for a slot 1 item. It needs it, ultimately. Morellonomicon is getting minus 15 AP, plus 750 gold cost, but plus 350 health. This makes Morellonomicon roughly diver sized, so that if you have to go Oblivion Orb because you're playing Gwen or Singed or whatever, the eventual slot upgrade does not feel like you're griefing yourself buying 0 durability on a melee champion at level 17. So that's the point here. But again, it's meant to be golden efficient. Like, your tier list of legendaries, Morello's is meant to be in D tier alongside Chempuk, Chainsword, and everything else, because as an aggressive Grievous Applicator, you can go buy the item, you can go buy your aggressive Grievous Applicator, and you can complete it when you need slots, but not because the item is great. Just, it's meant to fill in, kind of like how Zephyr fills in and says you can spend your gold at the end, don't worry about it. Riftmaker is getting a fairly simple small change of minus 10 AP, and also we're shortening the buff duration, or the buff stacks. So what this means is seconds 1 through 4 is the exact same item, and in fact when you're not in champion combat, also the exact same item. At second 4, you now have Omnivamp, when you wouldn't have otherwise. And at second 5 onwards, you have a little bit less damage amp, because you're getting, again, seconds 5 plus, you're getting 2% less damage amp, but you're the Omnivamp 1 second sooner. This basically hits the cadence to where if you land a spell and leave, it won't trigger itself all the way up to Omnivamp turning on. But it does mean you get into that state a little bit sooner, and you can be in that vamping state a little bit sooner and feel kind of better about that. Rod of Ages, talking about this one. It's in the health section overall. Minus 100 HP at max stacks, minus 10 AP at max stacks. Again, this is 1 per stack, so when you finish Roa, there's literally no change. After a minute, it is 1 AP and 10 health, which is basically not a nerf. But at the end of the day, when Rod of Ages got gain 1 level when you get to 10 stacks, you can roughly math out what that's really worth in terms of health and mana and base damage and functional CDR, because most skills scale CD with level. And it's like you can get a reasonable approximation for what Rod of Ages actually does on the last stack, and it was just overly efficient. This item is still very, very cheap, and it still fits all the other paradigms of going from about 95% efficient to about 140% efficient or so when it's done. Rylays, again, is a very cheap item, so 10 AP as a relative share of power goes a lot longer. Ultimately, the call is sacrifice more damage to buy this utility instead of lowering the utility, for example. But still going relatively high on health here, right? This is an item that is commonly built by outright juggernauts like Singed and Mordekaiser, and so want it to be very high in the HP. It is a lot of health, really high utility actually, and some damage. It's still 65 AP on a slot, which isn't bad. But yeah, you're not buying Rylays to one-shot people. If you want to one-shot people, this is not the item for you. There are plenty of items with 100 AP on them, and you can buy those instead. You can go buy Ludens, you can buy Shadowflame, you can buy Void Staff, you can buy Deathcap, you can buy Lichbane. Congrats, your full build already. It's a bunch of flat pen, bunch of percent pen, bunch of flat AP. You're still there, right? You're still going to have your 700 AP build doing that. That's going to be fine. But if you're going to get durability or you're going to get CDR, you're not getting 700 AP build. On to tanks now. There's going to be income tank stuff. So for their epics, Wing Moonplate is buffed 50 health for 1 move speed. 1% move speed. Balmy Cinder is getting the scaling removed away from it and getting the PvP damage lowered. So the general place here is better tank epics and better slot 1 tank legendaries, but lowering some of their gold scaling, lower some of their late game damage scaling. And we'll talk more about sort of longer term effects later on in the video, but Balmy Cinder, less health, fairly similar burn when you first buy it, but the big thing is a 20% increase in the minion monster damage. That Balmy Cinder feels like a good spike for unlocking some jungle clear, as well as giving you some pretty solid wave clear in lane itself, though of course does not have the same kind of PvP impact, right? Less base health, and in functional practice in the real world, less actual burn damage when you're facing enemy champions. Bramblevest, though, is becoming more efficient. When you want to rush a Bramblevest against auto attacker, the Thorns is going from 6 to 10, so that's there. Glacial Buckler is just a really, really bad item. Again, mana is not fairly priced in this game. My rule for mana is a quarter of a gold per point of mana. So 5 armor, 50 less gold, and 50 bonus mana on Glacial Buckler should make it pretty reasonable and a good item to rush if you want early mana to give you a bunch of spam. Here you go. It's actually going to be pretty solid now, I think. Negatron Cloak just being shrunk so that we can put lower MR on some items. So minus 5 MR, minus 50 gold. Not an efficiency change, but a smaller item change. Spectre's Cowl is just a weak component. Buying Spectre's Cowl as a counter to someone like Teemo or Vladimir who's trying to spam damage on you. Yeah, flat 10 MR. This should make Spectre's Cowl appropriately efficient as a way for a tank to stall out and survive lane and get the last hit under tower at least without killing anyone. Then Wardsville is being shifted all the way to being 15 flat damage block instead of 5 plus 0.35% HP. This break even, by the way, is 3,000 total health, so pretty much a strict buff to Wardsvale. Wardsvale, generally speaking, is going to be better than Bramblevest in terms of I buy this item to not lose lane. Ward's Mail is the item for, I want to stop getting wrecked by Vayne or Akshan or whatever. And this honestly should be something that even fighters should feel reasonable about buying, because this is a really, really good way to say, I'm going to stop taking poke here. And so the point was really to have some very, very good, for tanks, or for fighters who are willing to skip damage for a while, very strong laning epics, and kind of bring those back. Right? Glacial, Spectre's Cowl, Warden's Mail, Bramble, all these are really, really good defensive laning epics. Okay, on to armor legendaries. Deadman's Plate, talked about it earlier. Plus health, plus armor, a little bit less move speed, but it still has slow resist and like the on-hit damage and stuff, or the on-collide damage. Iceberg Gauntlet, talked about it. More expensive, better sheen. Slow is front-loaded, so again, a better one-item spike. Overall, as an armor item for both a tank or maybe a Juggernaut. Frozen Heart is getting plus 10 armor, but losing Rock Solid. To me, the AoE slow aura that says everyone deals 20% less auto attack damage from attack speed is pretty similar to everyone deals 15 less damage hitting me. And so basically converting Rock Solid into freezing their attacks to me was similar enough where I think it's okay to delete the passive and kind of replace it with this. That is the hope here. But Frozen Heart, of course, Rock Solid is worth more than 10 armor, so this is a nerf. That's the only change, though, otherwise. Sunfire Aegis getting a little bit of a reshape. It got a bunch of ramping damage when you made mythics and it never went away. Sunfire is not a mythic anymore. If people are concerned about damage creep, which they are, we actually have survey data on... So there's 2 questions, and it's champions deal too much damage and champions are too tanky are separately asked questions. And throughout time, one is always higher than the other. They got close around like 12.10. And then they just kept going this way. At no point in the last 4.5 years have people ever felt champions are too tanky more than they felt champions did too much damage, like across our player base. Which means, yeah, we're gonna, try to do some of this stuff. And some of that's gonna be tanks dealing less damage. And some of that's going to be trying to preserve that assassins and burst mages can still do that burst damage. Right? For most assassins, they didn't lose any burst damage. For most burst mages, they didn't lose any burst damage. Or at least they lost very, very little. Tanks are gonna lose some damage here. So, what's happening? Okay, so instead of 15 plus 1.75%, health scaling, it's going to be 20 plus 1% health scaling. It does not take all that long to reach this breakpoint, but you don't break it right away. This is actually still going to be better on slot 1. The second thing is the 1.25 and 1.0 minion and monster mod is becoming a 1.5 combined minion and monster mod, which means Sunfire Aegis as a rush to clear your jungle is going to be more than 50% better. It also means there's a very strong incentive to upgrade from Balmy Cinder, because now you actually get gold scaling, you get a increased base, you get a gold scaling, and you get to keep the mod, so it keeps moving forward instead of the monster mod like going away, for example, and really not being an upgrade. But also, the ramping damage when fighting epics and fighting enemy champions is going away. This was maybe inoffensive long term, but like, again, Sunfire Aegis was a completely reasonable item that plenty of tanks fought and bought and felt good about without ever ramping the damage against champions. This got added when it became a mythic item. It's not a mythic item. We can go back. It's fine. It's not a mythic item anymore. It is a wave clear item, which has some damage. This is fine. This is not nothing. By itself, this is like 27-ish DPS, which adds up. It's about what your auto attack damage does, and keep in mind, magic damage is better than physical damage because MR is lower than armor. I'm not saying it's literally better, it can't be, but it doesn't ramp up to 1.6x damage. Thornmail is being brought back to the old version of Thornmail, so it is becoming a lot cheaper. It is going to be very, very inexpensive. The 350 health is gone, but it's getting 30 armor back instead, so it is a pure 100 armor item. By the way, Thornmail is, I think, the second most built armor item in League of Legends. So for all the mage players who are like, but Phreak said we're going to be able to kill stuff. It's like, well, these tanks are going to buy an item that gives 0 stats against you. You're up a Giant's Belt against like a third of all tanks. That matters, right? That matters. That matters. But it does mean that Thornmail is a very spicy 100 armor and pretty, spicy amount of thorns damage. Now, the total thorns on item 1 is pretty much identical, right? 10 plus 25% at 70 is pretty close to 15 plus 15% at 100. Obviously, the later game scaling gets lower and lower, but this is still a decent amount of damage here overall. It's not uncommon to get another 100 or so bonus armor afterwards and still go to 45 thorns, which is, again, not bad. One thing I want to point out around the Grievous on Thornmail is Thornmail and Bremblevest are not meant to be proactive Grievous Wounds items. The point of Thornmail having Grievous is to say, hey, AD carries, you're going to have a hard time lifesteal tanking me. If I'm becoming non-threatening because you bought a Bloodthirster, I'm going to cut that by 40% and deal 45 damage back to you. You will still kill me, but you'll have a much harder time actually lifesteal tanking me when I'm giving you no bonus health for your Blade of the Ruin King, and my 100 armor is going to cut through your lifesteal because lifesteal is post-mitigation. That is why Thornmail has Grievous in most iterations of the item when it wasn't doing the active Grievous on CC. That's why it's there. It is still up to your damage champions to apply Grievous. It is still up to the extra user calling and the Oblivion Orb to do that. That is why it is there. That is the point of that. But anyway, the goal is still item nerfs overall, but the goal is also tank items nerfed the least of everything. Unending Despair, actually getting very little of a nerf at all, if anything. Minus 50 health, plus 5 armor. If Unending Despair becomes a more common item, congratulations. Mages, you're against a champion with 50 less health than they were before, right? With no other changes on you. But this should make the item definitely more common. I think this item is already pretty solid. I mean, ultimately, Unending Despair is... it is the generic, right? Like, here are all the armor tank items in the game, right? Okay, Deadman's Plate is the go fast armor tank item. Iceborne Gauntlet is the I want to deal damage armor tank item. Frozen Heart is the I'm going to tank for my team armor tank item. Sunfire Aegis is I want wave clear armor tank item. Thornmail is the I don't want you to lifesteal tank me armor tank item. Unending Despair is I just want a team fight and vibe, right? There's no targeting on Unending Despair, right? There's not even really an offensive bent to it, right? This just says we're in a team fight. I'm gonna heal. Like, I think a lot of the benefit here is actually for Visage users, right? If you're, playing Mundo going Visage, you're like, actually, I just bought a heal amp, let's go. And then Unending Despair has a cool tie-in there. But otherwise, the way it is right now, Unending Despair is basically I just need to be an armor tank team fighter. Cool. That's, to be fair, actually weirdly a narrow niche, but it's good at that at least. As the arguably least nerfed tank item. One exception, Randuin's Omen is unnerfed. Randuin's Omen is the exact same item as before. No change whatsoever. Randuin's Omen is still the same item. And the item is appropriately powerful. On to the MR tank items. Again, Abyssal Mask is here for the third or fourth time here. Whatever. Force of Nature basically has no users. I still don't like how much move speed's in the game, so minus 2% on the flat move speed, and minus 4% on the when the passive triggers bonus move speed in combat. Ultimately, instead of getting, 6 plus 10, 16% move speed in combat, this is going to be 4 plus 6 is 10% move speed in combat, so a little bit less kind of absurd. Hollow Radiance, minus 50 health. It's not minus MR, but it is minus health, so Mage is going to feel a bit better around their MR tanks. Similar situation to Sunfire Cape, getting rid of some of the gold scaling on the damage. It is going to be good early wave clear. Honestly, the explosions do more than enough damage to say that once you kill one minion, the whole wave blows up. Everything else is overkill. Getting the monster mod up to 1.25 so that you can feel better about going Hollow Radiance in the jungle. Otherwise, yeah, a meaningful nerf to the PvP damage, especially in the later game. Kinnick Rookern is losing some of the health regen, and the shield is going down by 3% max health. Kinnick is very, very MR skewed. This item is basically when you actually need to infinite tank MR. So it is very, very sharp in that regard, but to me this made sense. And it's just like, it's the lone 80 MR item. Spirit Visage is actually being shrunk down. Spirit Visage was the most or second most expensive MR tank item. It's going to move down to be the cheapest MR tank item at minus 200 gold to 2,700, with minus 50 health and minus 10 MR to compensate. Basically, this allows Visage to not be such a deep investment for any champ who always wants to buy it, either because they're a big self-healer like Ilaoi or Darius or Dr. Mundo or whatever. It's still being hey, the Spice Heroes is an MR item, and so you have to figure out when it fits for you. I think it's okay. There's usually magic damage somewhere in game, so it's fine to have that somewhere. But I'm just trying to make it less of a commitment so that if it's not a great game for MR, it can still feel better to buy. And hey, if Mundo has to always buy this item, then hey, he's meaningfully less tankier against the mages who are trying to kill him, right? Even though he'll still stack other MR items later. Alrighty, other tank items, the ones that are not specifically targeted at armor or MR. Heartsteel gets the lightest nerf of all, minus 100% base health per 5. Heartsteel is basically stronger. If you're Heartsteel Rusher, congratulations, you're basically unaffected. Have fun. This item kind of sucks, so it's getting a really, really, really small nerf on purpose. Jack Show is being reshaped a little bit to not be as much your one-stop shop for getting armor and MR when you don't have any. It has a passive that says get 30% more armor and MR. Now that it only gives 45 of each, it's kind of mediocre as your only MR item. I mean, it's still pretty good. I mean, 45 flat MR is not bad. It's what other items give, and then when the thing triggers, you get another 15-ish on top, so it's, you know, it's not horrible, but like there are better MR options, especially per gold. Jack shows the most expensive item here, but I get to put a giant spot onto it, so plus 50 health. I mean, ultimately it's still a gold efficiency nerf, and it still makes it worse as the splash item and helps it be more about, no, I got a lot of resist already, I went Thornmill, I went Frozen Heart, okay, I actually would like some decent health now in this slot, please, and let me go rely on my multiplier for getting more armor is kind of the way the math works out here. And then Warmogs, another touch here, minus 1% move speed always, minus 1% move speed on the passive. Maybe we have to go harder on this item still, but we'll wait and see. I don't really mind that Warmogs is like in the game and actually good. One thing that's odd is that health is just the best early game stat. The like bang for your buck for health is better at level 6 than it is at level 16 compared to what armor and MR do. If we got into a world where champions had much, much less base armor and armor growth, and we like retuned the game around there being very, very few resists, that would be a little bit less true. But that's where we are right now. So it is true. We move on to support items now. Support epics. As mentioned before, mana is an incredibly overpriced stat. Mana regen is also a very overpriced stat. Fairy Charm is buffed. Fairy Charm is still not gold efficient, but Banal Glass Mirror can become closer to reasonable, and so it's going to be more MP5 and less gold, to where it's going to be pretty close. I think it's going to be like 96% by my calculations, which is like at least not a trap component anymore. Forbidden Idol, straight up 200 gold cheaper. Both heal and shield power and regen are essentially overpriced stats in the current game, and so Forbidden Idol gets to be a lot nicer. So Enchanter's going to feel much, much better about their piecemeal epic upgrades. Much, much, much better about them. Let's talk about Enchanter legendaries. Ardent Censer is getting dropped to 2200 gold. It is going from 8% move speed to 4% move speed. It is losing 5 ability power, but it's gaining 2 heal and shield power. So trying to make these items more about the heal and shield power, which makes them, again, of course, harder to poach, and makes them, of course, less selfish, but also making them a little bit cheaper. You get to fit those items in your build a little bit more. You're seeing, you know, several price reductions here in the Enchanter space, because getting to finish your build is fun, and we can keep going and kind of whittling things down while still trying to ensure they're not getting poached by other classes. Staff Flowing Water is getting fully sharpened. The move speed on the passive is gone. Now, to be fair, 4 seconds of 10% move speed is basically unfeelable. I know that's why that's here. This is the tough thing, is like Ardent Censer gives you attack speed, which means it's feelable, and you see the blue number on hit. So as a support, I can see when my AD carries hitting with Ardent Censer. I'm like, there's that 25, and they can somewhat feel the buff by feeling their like 25 or whatever % attack speed buff. It is very, very hard to make spells feel different when you hit them. So it was for all ability haste. It is very hard to feel ability haste, and has its own issues anyway. It is basically possible to feel 10% move speed. And so the options were Staff of Flowing Water can be just the move speed on buff thing, which I think could have been reasonable, right? We could have said like Staff of Flowing Water is just the old passive from Shirelia's, and it's just 20%, 50% move speed on spell hit. That's it. See ya. But I'm like, no, it's going to be niche. It's going to be niche. That's fine. 15 extra AP to both me and my teammate on spell hit. Minus 5 AP flat, that's fine. I'm getting up net 10, my teammate's up net 15. That's 25 ability power. Yes, it's at the cost of 10, 20% move speed sometimes, of course, yes. But hey, also plus heal and shield power, also minus 50 gold. This item, I would argue, is, I mean, in some cases stronger. Obviously, the move speed has real value, don't get me wrong. But I actually felt this was unfeelable. I felt it was really hard to use. I mean, you kind of needed a long duration here to make the AP usable, so you couldn't even do like a 2-second long buff, because the, like, card that couldn't even finish channeling was R for that one, right? Like, this just doesn't really make sense. So it's a 4-second long buff. We can make it longer, honestly, and make it, like, you know, almost permanent for your, you know, the brand you're supporting or whatever. But to me, I think the shape of the item makes more sense. Moonstone Renewer is actually getting hit fairly hard. Minus 50 health, minus 5 AP. The solo heal and solo shield are different numbers from the chain heal and chain shield. Those are being collapsed down. So if you're in lane, just like doing Soraka things to your teammate, it's just this nerf, which is quite small, right? This is a pretty small change. But realistically, the value of the chain heal and the value of the chain shield is really, 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 really high. There's so much power here. And I look at win rate data, I'm like, oh yeah, Moonstone is like actually the best enchanter item pretty much. And so it's a 25% cut to the chain heal and a 22% cut to the chain shield. Now, to be fair, there can be plenty of times where you heal one person and no one else is low, or you shield the person in front and no one else takes damage. These things do go to waste fairly decently, and they don't go to waste when you're probably solo healing or solo shielding. But do want to call out that like in actual practice is probably nerfed less than you think, but it also is a simplification of rules because the healing is now always 30% better and the shielding is like always 35% better, or whatever the numbers actually are. Lethality is getting a -5 flat AP and -10 on the heal and damage per shard. This is pretty fair. I think right now the best Heli users are ones that can essentially almost abusively re-trigger the spirits constantly now. There's actually a world where I might want to go back to the 3-stack paradigm to let the champs who can not use it as often. Like, we're in a world now where finally echoes actually feel like it's a real item. But what's funny is like it's actually competitive on champions like Nami, but you just see it on basically Senna and Melio because they're really, really good at just like chaining this through. Imperial Mandate is losing the move speed on proc, and it's cheaper. That's it. So Imperial Mandate is explicitly now a very offense-driven enchanter item. To be fair, we have many of these, right? We have Ardent Censer. All Ardent Censer does is deal more damage and give you some heal and shield power. Sapphire Water just gives you more ability power, and your teammate more ability power, gives you some heal and shield power. Imperial Mandate just says deal more damage to that guy. I don't mind that supports say, hey, some of my outputs are let's go deal more damage, but we do want ones that also say, hey, let's go live longer, right? Here's Redemption, here's Echoes, here's Moonstone. Like, these things all say, hey, let's go live longer. Echoes of damage is like kind of fake in a lot of cases. Shirley's, of course, says let's go move fast. Shirley's basically has almost no optimal users, so we can just drop the move speed by 1%, but go buy it, it's fine. So this item is, I think, probably the least nerfed enchanter item. And then Dawncore, gold efficiency-wise, is relatively neutral. Dawncore at slot 3, as in support item, a legendary 1, and then Dawncore, which is 300% total mana regen, is fairly equivalent to other items, and now being 200 gold cheaper should be relatively approachable, where it's only a little bit more expensive than other enchanter items. Of course, at slot 4, it is pretty much best in slot, and that's just how capstones work. But I expect this to be a buff because Dawncore is, yeah, going to be pretty good looking as a result of this change. Again, this nerf is actually technically gold efficiency down, but just being reachable is a big deal, and it is a big stack. It is a big stack of heal and shield power on one slot to say, if you want just the best heals and shields, go get your 80 ability power, go get your like 20% heal and shield power, go ham. And if we see it more, great. We get to have enchanters have some really big shields and feel good about them. And if they want to skip haste, they can. Dawncore explicitly doesn't have haste on it because it has the most per spell power, and that's fine. That's totally fine. That's great. I'm glad that people are going to buy this item finally. Redemption, I kind of skipped over it. Simply -5 heal shield power. This is already a very good multiplier, don't get me wrong. But one thing is Redemption is often picked by support tanks, and I think that is fine. And so if this item is a little bit less enchanter skewed and says actually as a tank, it's okay to go things like Redemption, Locket, Knight's Vow, and your outputs are like, I'm more of a warden, I'm not frontlining, I'm going to keep my teammates alive. Nerfing Redemption in this way helps open it up a little bit more for the tank support usage. Onto the tank supports themselves, though. Knight's Vow, pretty small nerf of just plus 100 gold. Locket loses 5 armor and MR, which to be fair is more of like a 200 gold nerf, although you don't always use both at the same time. Zeke's, we're going to skip over for a second, is losing 20 DPS on the ulti, thing. So ultimately, you go from doing 250 damage to doing 150 damage. I don't think it needs to do any more than that, so it's just finding some room to nerf Zeke's. It's still a perma-slow for 5 seconds, which is very, very good. Then on a Trailblazer, I'm pretty sure Trailblazer is simply weak. I had half of mine to rework Trailblazer in the way I did Zeke's, which was give it armored MR, which by the way was successful in reviving the item that can actually exist. People actually buy people actually buy Zeke's now. It was already good, but it felt so bad to like waste on mana and to only get armor because supports are often stuck at one item. So there's a world where Trailblazer is class plus null magic and is 20 plus 20, but ultimately it's cheaper, it has more health, and has a little bit less move speed. Trailblazer honestly just has no users, and so trying to bring it back. Okay, other changes going into Split 3. I did not have a direct hand in any of these, so it's going to be somewhat tangential, like sort of tangential knowledge from me. First things first, lethal tempo is back. This is going to give way less attack speed to where it will no longer hopefully invalidate champion patterns. This was kind of the problem it had with Yasuo and Yone and champs like this, where lethal tempo became your kit. You no longer care about your spells, you just right click people to death, and that wasn't fun for the Yasuo and Yone, and it wasn't fun for their opponents either because they had no counterplay anymore. They just got stat checked, and that felt pretty bad. So the total AS is going down. That said, it's giving some unhit damage. That unhit damage is going to scale with AS. Also, the unhit damage is going to level scale as well. So it will still give some attack speed, but it's going to be less than before, hopefully to the point where it doesn't feel like you're just winning things on stat check. It also is going to be enough, low enough attack speed to where attack speed itemization can feel like it can do something. What's interesting is this actually weirdly is similar to the Varus passive that I rebuilt, which was it gives a flat amount of attack speed, and it gives functionally on hit damage scaling with attack speed because it gives you attack damage ability power scaling with bonus attack speed. Like weirdly, we just did it again. Different designer, but like it's good to see that someone else had, you know, a similar idea to me, which is like this actually does work, giving making something be an attack speed scaler instead. It's a functional sort of pattern for making champions not overcap AS. Presence of Mind is being switched from regen for 4 seconds on Champ Pit to a Taste of Blood paradigm, which is hit a champion, gain a thing on a cooldown. The uptime is lower technically because you could have had permanent uptime in Presence of Mind, and this is an uptime of 50%. You get 4 seconds worth instantly, but only once every 8 seconds. So it's going to be probably less regen, but the takedown stuff is unchanged. Nimbus Cloak is getting buffed pretty substantially. The low cooldown summoners going from 5 to 12% move speed. The mid cooldown summoners going from 20 to 28% move speed, and the high cooldown summoners going from 25 to 35%. These are all percents, by the way, move speed, so a pretty strict Nimbus Cloak buff. Shield Bash is losing the 1 to 10 resist and is simply going to deal more damage. While obviously it's good to give tanks durability and whatnot, the entire point of Shield Bash is gain a shield, go deal damage, and overall, like cutting runes down a little bit and sharpening them and doing like a very specific thing, I think is a good thing to do. I think that is wise, and so moving in that direction, I think is a good thing. Biscuits, basically trying to get rid of some of the uninteractive mana sustain. To say that you're more likely to run out of mana. If you want to fix your mana, it might require an item, maybe like an Essence Reaver or an Mana Mune or something else here. So the Biscuits no longer restore any mana, but they restore 50% more health. Instead of all the Biscuits giving you 120 mana, they give you 90 health. Now, I think this right here is a pretty big buff. I think not getting mana in lane is a nerf overall to like the laning phase power of the rune, but 90 flat HP is quite good. This allows Biscuits to be a pretty solid feeling defensive rune. Where you can buy it to not lose lane. Now that said, you cannot get Absorb Life and Second Wind and Biscuits. You can't get all 3. So it, you know, there probably were some like Resolve Inspiration players who are now getting Biscuits for more health than before. Sure, those are real, but I think this hopefully won't be absurd, and if it is, there's a very easy tune lever here for how much health, or a very easy tune lever for the rate in which you get Biscuits, or an easy tune lever for how much health comes out of each one, like the amount of healing, I should say. So the fact is, there's 3 to even 4 levers, aka how many Biscuits, that are all tunable here, and so I'm not worried this item's going to be, like, this thing's going to be OP long term. I think we'll be all right. Alrighty, so I want to talk about what I think is going to happen because of Split 3. I don't know if it's going to be a short or long time here in this slide, but I want to talk about it, okay? So one thing I want to bring up is that tanks will be, and are allowed to be, good early game. So it's actually a discussion I had with several members of the design team last month, or maybe the month before, I don't remember. But it was like, what do we specifically envision tank versus fighter side lane interactions to look like across like the entire game League of Legends? And broad strokes, early game, tanks should feel comfortable doing short trades. They should feel okay going in and being like, I W autoed you, I let my spells, but they're long cooldowns. They don't have auto attacks. You know, they're going to lose long trades to Jax and Camille and Irelia and all these champions, but blow cooldown, blow cooldown, blow cooldown, walk away, or like grasp and leave. Tanks should feel comfortable doing that, which means they should feel okay on components, and they should feel okay relative to other champions on Epic. They should feel okay relative to other champions, even on Legendary 1. As you see in a lot of these cases, like, tanks aren't weaker, in fact, are sometimes stronger on a component, on an Epic, or on First Legendary. And that's intentional, especially in short trade scenarios. But they are meant to get outscaled in a 1v1 context, right? If tanks win the 1v1 and are also the best team fighter, they're just the best kind of champion in the game. And so long term, they should get outscaled at side laning. Generally speaking, on equal gold, they should be able to hold their turret, but not have prio. They should be forced back so that the top laner can push, maybe poach a camp, or push, then roam first, force TP disadvantage, things like that. That should be what the fighter gets to do. If the fighter's ahead, they get to start killing. If the tank is ahead, they might have prio instead, and they get to start, imposing their will. Sure. But like, the power curve of a tank in respect to side laning should be strong early, bad late. Of course, relative to playing out League of Legends, I don't think tanks are meant to be like bad as a class late game, but it means they have to be good at team fighting, which means they have to be very disruptive or very tanky or both, because they can't win on side lane and they're not allowed to one-shot you. Their damage, in most cases, needs to fall off. Okay. Now, I do think that with these changes, tanks will be OP. That's fine. We can nerf them. So I'm going to take an extra step back from this. When I first joined the design team, one thing I had wanted to do, and this is going to sound weird, so I'm going to explain it. I wanted to find a way to undo the durability update. Not because I thought the results were bad, because I think slowing down combat basing was a very good goal, and it was good for League of Legends, and it was a good thing to do. Now, contrary to what I keep seeing on Reddit, the durability update has not been undone by like the last 2 years worth of item changes. It's not true. I have the data. What has happened is 12.10 happened. Players were like, wow, things feel so much tankier. That's great. But the game was still too bloody, or like still too lethal. And so you felt the differences back 2 years ago, and you're like, wow, that update happened. And then you kept playing League, and you're like, the game still feels too squishy. And instead of being like, oh, right, I just lost the honeymoon phase, the common refrain is, but Riot undid the durability update. But like, you can go look at most patch history stuff. It's really not nearly as inflated as every champ being 10% more durable. Like, we did not globally raise damage by 10% in the last 2 years. I am certain that did not happen. So like, we didn't. We didn't like, specific champions are squishier. People who rushed old Mythic Shield Bow are squishier than before. That is true. So like, Samira and Quinn specifically are squishier than they used to be. Yes. But like, Jinx isn't, right? Nor is she really doing much more damage than before. She doesn't have old true damage Kraken Slayer, for example. Anyway. The point is, I would like to get to the state where we can undo the durability update, only because the fact that we had to power up everyone's stats so much has had a lot of other interactions. So, hey, it means that minions are less threatening in lane, so ranged auto attackers don't care that they pulled minion aggro when they like go to harass you in lane, and you just get kind of worn down. It means that towers are less lethal, so you can just go tower dive people because everyone has more health and armor and MR. It means it's harder to be an assassin because everyone gets so much more armor and health from leveling up, which means an ahead of the curve assassin who is up an extra item because they have to keep up with the fact that everyone else got a bunch of stuff. Ahead of the curve assassin is overboard levels of lethal, and a behind assassin is completely screwed by being, their opponents are a level down, and that one level is actually more meaningful than before, right? All these things matter and affect kill thresholds. And these are like the subtle, low-key, longer-term knock-on effects that happen, but they are why I'm like, I know the game used to work and be fully functional 8 years ago. There's no reason we would have had to have inflated all of our base stats unless we were very explicitly counting for things like most of the base stat conversations, most of the base stat conversions that happened in like 2017 because of runes being deleted were like, yeah, everyone's base health went up by like 100 or something, or their base armor went up or whatever. It's like, yeah, of course. Like, yes, champions have way more health growth than before because we gave mages their health growth seals because they always ran those. Like, yep, that's totally reasonable. Of course we can have that. That's totally fine. Like, that to me is not we're inflating the game. That's we're compensating for the system that we deleted from the game and gave it to his base stats. Cool. Everyone's base AD is higher than it used to be because they used to all run attack damage marks. That's fine. But champions level 1 attack speed is higher than it used to be because they used to run attack speed redundancies. That's fine. I have no qualms here. That's not a problem. But it's like, oh, we just like had to give everyone 70 health and a bunch of arm and MR growth. Okay, there's something we must have had to have unwinded to have gotten here. And so it's like, okay, basically, it wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to undo all these changes. It's like, I need to get myself to understand the game to the level to know how we got here and why this was needed and like Were we actually this damaging before? Was it runes? Was it items? Like, I want to understand the game well enough to know what got us there so that we can undo those things if they were bad, or keep them if they were good, and understand what our new normal should actually be. Because of course there are long-term ramifications to making everyone more durable. And every other system has to move. And so like imagine, right? We're like, okay, let's even imagine we wanted to bring early game lethality back up. We want to make people do more damage. Okay, well, in order to do more damage, to like let Akali or Zed or Kiana have kill threat on you in lane, okay, we increase the power of their Q, their W, their E, their auto attacks, their whatever. Oh, okay, so their wave clear got better too, right? And their jungle taking got better too, right? And their turret killing got better too, right? All you wanted was level 1 kill threat, so what you got was a bunch of other stuff immediately as well. When what you really wanted was just taking 50 health away from every champion or something, or taking away, 1 armor from every champion or something, or whatever it is, right? It's like, oh yeah, we have to make these lethality items really, really efficient because every champion in the game has like 112 armor at level 18. Or they can just have 80, and you don't have to have as much lethality. And, right, like, and this is not to malign the durability update, because I think the overall result was positive for the game. Like, to be really clear, the overall result was very positive. It did really good things for the game. Like, players really liked having slower, more methodical combat. And to be clear, like, these changes are going to do something fairly similar of making the game even more durable. But what I want is to get the point where the survey answer of there's too much damage versus champs are too tanky to maybe for the first time ever cross, and we can start pulling back these things that disproportionately hurt assassin viability, disproportionately made it so that you can just play auto-pushing AD carries in mid and never be threatened ever by a LeBlanc or a Talon or a Fizz ever, because XD Lamau, I have 750 health at level 1. What would you possibly do to me? And like, yeah, like, the game was clear, like, it clearly worked beforehand. One other thing I want to bring up is I have not done it exhaustively, but I looked at almost every single like semifinals plus game from Worlds 2017, which was Ardent Sensor Meta Worlds. And so Ardent Sensor Meta Worlds, every single AD carry ran Doran Shield start. Because all they wanted to do was permanently sustain throughout the laning phase, have no risk, get the Ardent Sensor online in the support, and then power spike. So current level 1 AD carries on Doran Blade start have the same overall durability and overall DPS as 2017 AD carries with a Doran Shield start. Now, of course, that is basically, right, durability update, giving, these levels of stats and whatnot, but like, that was before Runes Reforged as well, by the way, right? That was just like the sum total throughput of everything adding up to the game, where we're currently in a world where the aggressive laning start is identical to the defensive laning start from 7 years ago. And I don't think that's correct, right? Because obviously if you went Doran Shield instead, you'd be even more skewed to like, oh, of course nothing dies. And, other things like the amount of health regen on Doran Shield stuff, like the uniques are not being tracked here, don't get me wrong. But like auto attack DPS, total throughput of like health, armor, MR, and like all this summed up together, yeah, we're the same, but we were on Doran Shield starts, 7 years ago. And so again, like, I would like to find ways to unwind some of this and bring back lethality, kill thresholds, and all this kind of stuff, whatever. So, these kind of things are things that I want to think about. Anyway, what I think is going to happen in the short term is this patch will come out, and tanks may be OP. We can nerf them. We can nerf late game tank burst damage. So that is going to be much, much harder for Zac or a Mumu who's not building AP, or Malphite or whoever, to solo kill a squishy in the span of 2 seconds. It will require them to build a Juggernaut item, and maybe, just maybe, with these Juggernaut items having some solid health scalings on it, Malphite once in a while says, you know what, I want to try to carry, I'm going to go buy Hullbreaker, I'm going to go buy an Iceborne Gauntlet, and say, okay, at least he went and bought the damagey items, okay, fine, I buy that. But I expect we'll have to nerf some tanks, and we'll generally, probably, I would guess, nerf some late game damage. And then maybe we get to the point where players actually think the game is too tanky. In which case, we can peel back some tankiness. And this gives room for classes to stand out a little bit more from before, and we can go back and say, what are we at now? What's happening now? Where are we here? I think we are at where we are allowed to be for items. I don't think the overall efficiency of items themselves can really move anymore. There are a few items that are still left relatively high because I didn't think we could bring them down any further without them probably not getting picked anymore. But if it turns out that Trinity Force and Blade of the Rune King are the best item in the game, these items have room to move. There's some that feel like they don't, but we'll see what happens. But ultimately, it's going to be then reassess, right? It's find the balance outliers, handle stuff, let players figure out builds, and then reassess and see where we are. We'll see how players feel about combat pacing. We'll see how players feel about snowballing. We'll see how players feel about a bunch of stuff. But I can totally see a world where we even decide to lower the amount of gold in the game a little bit and just make there be less snowballing via how much gold you get from objectives or kills or repeated kills. And a whole bunch of stuff. Another one that's actually in survey data is more players feel like comebacks are hard than they feel that games can't be closed out. Right. So we're at like damage feels high, damage feels low, and game is hard to come back from, game is hard to close in terms of, high answers, low answers. So again, general survey data and player sentiment indicates that we can make the game have slower paced combat and less lethality overall right now. But again, we still want to preserve it for assassins and burst mages. Absolutely right. There are classes that are meant to kill you in the span of 2 seconds. I don't want to delete those from the game. I want those champions to function. I really, really do. At the same time, it seems that we also have plenty of room to further bring down things like snowballing. I also think that game durations are good. I think the overall duration of games of League of Legends is good, which means that there's a whole wide world of strings to attach to make sure we don't significantly increase game duration. Because when we did 12.10, when the durable update hit, games went longer, right? It was harder to dive because towers got buffed and game duration went up. And assassins were non-viable, and so things had to be done to make sure assassins could do their jobs correctly. These things all have to be found and assessed and figured out. There will be some stuff that we have to do. Absolutely. We'll have to do some stuff here. But again, I want assassins to be able to assassinate. I want combat pacing to feel slower than it currently does. I don't really want game duration to change. I want the game to feel less snowball-y. Feel like maybe you have a slightly more chance of coming back, or at least, even if you're not coming back, the game is less snowballed, so the game is still closer for longer, right? These are all things that very lightly happen here, but are things that I want to continue for us to do in the fallout of this patch to see what goes on. I believe that is everything. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.